All right, what's up? Welcome to a discussion that I think is timely given a lot of the internet drama and debates and discussions which you might think would be about theology, history, geopolitics, the relationship between church and state. But unfortunately, it turns out, no. Most of the discussion really has nothing to do with that. And so I thought it would be very timely to delve into this subject and get into the history of the question of the role of church and state, how they relate to one another. Is there a superior relationship between one to the other? Is one above the other? Does authority derive from one to the other? Or perhaps they are completely unrelated independent spheres. Perhaps the state is some sort of satanic entity in itself, as some believe. In what sense is Jesus, quote unquote, the king, when people refer to Christ the King? And what about the historic confessions between Protestant, Catholic, and Orthodox? How have they treated this question? Is there commonality between anybody, Orthodox and Catholics? Is there commonality between Protestants and Orthodox at all? What about Caesaropapism or Erastianism? So tonight we're going to get into that. It's just too ripe of a topic not to discuss, given that everyone's talking about it. And the thing that surprised me, I tried to get into Lauren Chen's space. She did a space where she was inviting people to come discuss the topic. I assumed this meant the theological, historical, biblical history view of this. Church fathers, patristic view. No. Had nothing to do with that. It was only about whether or not this phrase can be said, and is it anti-Shemitic. Right. So it didn't really have anything to do with the question of what is the correct teaching, but rather censorship and the phrase. And I don't fault anybody for pointing out the freedom of speech and the ability to say this and to fight against people that want this kind of speech shut down. But it's like, so much of what happens in today's Twitter sphere, public sphere, debate sphere, there's never any context. People don't know what the history of the topics are. They don't know the debates. They don't know the correct view, theologically speaking. And so it just ends up being these sort of scream squabbles where people want to say names back and forth and don't have any theological grounding or historical background to understand what Protestants have believed, have they evolved, what Roman Catholics have believed, have they evolved, and what's the classic Orthodox teaching, which, as we know, is ossified, set in stone. It's so boring. They don't change. They don't evolve. They're so just ossified. They don't even evolve or whatever. They just stay, which is precisely what we want. Coffee with Sister J, which is the opposite of other coffees with people who want to evolve the doctrines. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about some topics that are going to be really difficult for a lot of people. Protestants are going to have a hard time tonight. People said, I haven't looked at your channel in a while. Now you look like Curtis Yarvin. That's funny because there might be a little overlap with Curtis Yarvin type of views tonight, as everybody always points out. But it's going to be a little difficult for Protestants and even perhaps for some Roman Catholics. However, I will say this from the outset. Most traditional-minded Roman Catholics and traditional-minded Orthodox and a few scant groups amongst classical Protestants do have kind of common ground here. We do typically agree that there is a social teaching of the church and a teaching of the state. Does the church have any official teaching on the role of the state, its limits, its boundaries, its domains, its rights? Or perhaps we're supposed to be libertarian. Maybe we're supposed to be against the state. Maybe we're supposed to be anarcho-pacifist hippie Jesus followers. Man, like Jesus was like a cool dude or whatever, man. He always says, take a stone out of your own eye before you throw it at the other people or whatever, and like, just love people and be cool, man. That's like what he said. He was like a homeless hippie or whatever. Really? Homeless hippie. So these are the people, of course, that have no idea that Jesus is the second person of the Godhead. No idea of all the messianic prophecies all throughout the Old Testament about the conversion of nations and states. Yes, you heard me right. Nations and states, kingdoms in the messianic era. What? Oh, you hadn't thought about that, had you? Even though it's central to everybody's apologetic who has any kind of Christianity, to argue that Jesus fulfills all these messianic prophecies and that the church is the fulfillment of all the prophecies of the Gentiles converting in the Psalms, in Genesis, in Isaiah, in Ezekiel, in Jeremiah. And what about all those multitudes of passages which describe kings and queens coming and submitting to the Messiah? How do we know when to allegorize? How do we know when it's figurative? How do we know when it might be saying there really will be kings and queens converting? What about Daniel 7, 9, and Revelation 5? There's a lot of parallels in those passages. Well, turns out the way that we interpret a lot of the historical context of these passages, whether we're partial preterists or not, will also play a role in how we understand the application of these passages and this doctrine to the history of the church. Because as you can probably figure out, many evangelicals, many premillennialists, many dispensationalists will take so many of the things that are actually applicable to here and now in the church era, the kingdom era, and postpone it, delay it, throw it off into the end times in some Judaizing heresy of a 1,000-year kingdom on earth where there's a new temple. So we're gonna have to tie in some of that, and we're gonna talk about. Somebody's asking me about the. So I'm sorry, I can't tell if that's a trolling joke there. And the guy that asked the question there in the super chat. So I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'll have to deal with this. I can't find the tweet because I'm logged out of Twitter right now on the computer. But Michael says for $5, did you hear about Putin opening the old vaults? So 1400s is not the oldest vaults. Okay, maybe in Russia, but the biblical figures in that cavalcade of images that a lot of brothers on Twitter are sharing. Okay, first of all, they're not all black. Some of them are old, and old icons turn black. It doesn't mean the people were black. Jesus was not black. He's a Hebrew. And the other pictures, about half of them, are St. Moses the Black. Totally different dude. And everybody knows this. So I'm not trying to be mean to you, Michael, but this is just total nonsense, total low IQ idiocy, and people just have no historical grounding or foundation at all. And there's literally like tens of thousands, maybe millions of people sharing this stupid tweet and these stupid TikToks that literally think that Jesus is Moses the Black and that this is some sort of stupid cover-up. Just literal. I mean, this is what. Now you guys understand why it's so annoying when I go on TikTok to debate. And people want more of it because they find it entertaining. But I mean, it's really difficult to deal with super hard-headed, totally arrogant, delusional people. And this is the kind of stuff that feeds into the Hebrew Israelite heresy. So you're absolutely right that the insanity of these Hebrew Israelite people, they use this kind of nonsense as if Moses the Black is Jesus. And then what's funny is that the examples that they're putting up, there's literally Greek lettering on the icon that tells you who it is. But they don't even know that the Greek lettering it says Moses the Black. It says Athanasius. Okay, it's not Jesus. So, hate to be a ball buster, bearer of bad news for all of the We Was Kang's TikTok bros. But shout out to Yakub. Michael says for $1, I was just copying and pasting the tweet of my brain dead friend. Yeah, I thought you were joking there. I figured that was a joke. But yeah, no, Moses the Black is not Jesus, and Jesus was not actually from Ethiopia. I don't even know what we're going to have to do an investigation into the Hebrew Israelites, because just like it's just being promoted everywhere. It's probably got some kind of Fed promotion, and it's probably going to lead to all kinds of madness, and it's completely insane. I mean, it's just like the most ridiculous stuff. All right. Now, as you can imagine, every Orthodox person knows that Christ is king because we have countless icons showing him as the king. This, of course, is the prophet, priest, and king icon. And this is my favorite icon. We have it downstairs here at this house, the icon wall, because it shows us that threefold office as a fulfillment of all the things that the Old Testament says the Messiah would be. So three of the common themes throughout the multitudes of messianic prophecies in the Old Testament include the idea that Jesus would be a prophet. He would be the greatest of the prophets. The Messiah will be the greatest of the prophets. He will preach to the nations, preach righteousness, preach against idolatry, preach against all of the degeneracy of the pagan nations. He will also predict the future, which is part of the office of a prophet. Prophets don't just predict the future, they also are preachers. He would also be a priest in that he would fulfill the role of Melchizedek, because, of course, the original type of Christ's priesthood is not the Levitical priesthood or the Aaronic priesthood, it's the Melchizedekian priesthood. That does not mean that the Levitical Aaronic priesthood is not also a type of Christ, but as Paul argues in Hebrews 7, it's actually preeminent above the Levitical because it comes before, and Abraham, from whom the Levitical priesthood derives its lineage, as Paul says, Aaron was in the loins of his father Abraham, paid tribute by that very fact, by default, to the greater when Abraham tithed to Melchizedek early on in Genesis. And so Melchizedek is an actual historical figure. He's not an unknown semi-divine person, as a lot of idiotic people come up with these weird theories. Has nothing to do with the Mormon idea of the Melchizedekian priesthood. No. Christ's priesthood is, according to Psalm 110, he is forever, eternally, a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And that refers to his second person of the Godhead status, as well as the intention to become man and to be this high priest role. And so it is Christ that is the Melchizedekian priest, and the Aaronic Levitical priesthood also is a type of and is fulfilled in Christ, as Hebrews 7 itself argues. So you see, Hebrews actually argues that both are have their reference point and their telos in Christ. Both are fulfilled in Christ. But the Melchizedekian is superior. And so in that sense, we could say that how could there be Gentile priests? As the prophecies of the Old Testament predict, the end of Isaiah. How is that even possible? How could there be an altar in Egypt, as we read? Where do we read? We read that recently in one of the live streams that we did. It's Isaiah 19. How is there an altar in Egypt? You can only be a priest in Jerusalem and at the temple. How could there be Gentile priests? How could there be an altar in Egypt? It's not possible. Well, it's possible because of the Messianic prophecies about the covenant being opened up to the Gentiles and the superseding of the Aaronic priesthood by the Melchizedekian priesthood, which is a type of Christ. So Christ's priesthood, which is the Orthodox Church, is the priesthood spread throughout all the nations, the one true Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. Everybody can go and see and learn and verify that that is the church of the first 1,000 years. So that's the church that spread throughout the Roman Empire, converted the nations. The Orthodox Church today is the only church that continues to believe the same identical dogmatic teachings of the church of the first 1,000 years. Therefore, the Orthodox Church is the identically same church of the first millennium, and thus the fulfillment of all of those messianic prophecies and the prophecies about the Gentile nations converting and coming into the church. And I would add to that, as I will argue throughout this discussion tonight, only the Orthodox Church still retains the classic teaching of Symphonia, or that Christ is also king in the civil sphere. And this is the whole history of Byzantium. It's the whole history of the idea of the monarch as the icon of God in the sense of ruling on earth through divine justice. We see this in Romans 13, where even a pagan emperor, according to Paul in Romans 13, even Nero, who was completely wicked, can still, in a sense, be an image of divine providence and divine justice. Paul accords to the Roman Empire, to the Roman Imperium, to Caesar, the ability to exercise the sword. And that's nothing new. In fact, the same principle had been seen in the book of Daniel when providentially Nebuchadnezzar is recognized as the existing authority. So even though he's pagan, he can still have a recognized providential authority. Now he has limits. He's not able to tell you to worship the statues of him, nor can Caesar tell you to stop worshiping Christ and worship him. And yet he still has the state authority. That's the attitude of Romans 13. So remember, it's not an either or of total statism, nor is an attitude of no state at all. You see how Romans 13 has a balanced view that also has to be read in light of the rest of Scripture. We see, again, an example of Daniel, a providential role for Nebuchadnezzar, where God does allow him to rule, and his empire is even spoken of in the early chapters of Daniel in that way, that God's providence brought it about. We see the similar situation with Darius. Cyrus and Darius, actually. Cyrus is called the Great Shepherd. He becomes a type of Christ in the latter chapters of Isaiah, and he allows the temple to be rebuilt as well. I think that's right. The decree goes forth, I think, from Cyrus, as Ezra says. So the point here is that prophet, priest, and king are a triplicity, a trifold office that Christ fulfills, and they all go together. So there's no Christ is king without the other two. So I don't at all disagree with the correct phraseology of Christ as king. No, I just have two concerns. One concern is that a lot of the Twitter spamming of it really has nothing to do with Christ in the Orthodox view. In other words, it needs to be the Orthodox view first, and that means that Christ first has to reign in here, and we're all failing at that. And what happens a lot of times is a lot of people want to replace the inner repentance side of this with, well, I'll just do a bunch of external tweeting, projecting, a bunch of external owning the libs with it. I'm going to tweet it out to make everybody mad. And it has no reference to your actual life. And so they turned it into a performative act, and that's not what it is. It's not a performative act. It's not a performance. It's not a thing to own the libs. And so a lot of the piety signalers, they are correct in this point, who were saying this quite often. So everything on Twitter is so ridiculous. You get these either ors, right? So you get a bunch of people saying Christ is king, we should be able to say it, and we're going to own everybody with it. That's annoying because, okay, but are you applying this in reality? Do you actually believe in the threefold office of Christ? Or do you actually think that this is just a based political thing? And that's the super annoying part of this, which is wrong. Okay, you can't isolate one of these threefold offices to the exclusion of the other two and make this some sort of performative act where Christ is king to own the libs. Because if you don't have the right theology to go with this, I mean, it's all going to fail anyway. It's going to be ridiculous. So we need the right theology. And the other thing, too, is that the political application of it is really the lowest tier of importance. So it has to start with you, then it moves to your local relationships, and then it moves out from that to family, to state, nation, etc. That's the model of permeation. the model of permeation, that's the way it's supposed to happen. Even if there have been situations in history where a king converted and then his whole nation state converted, that's not the norm, especially not nowadays. That's not how it's going to happen now. So the way it's going to happen nowadays, because we don't really live in a Christian society, certainly don't live in an Orthodox society. We live in pretty much a pagan society. And how was Rome converted? Was it converted because the church for 3 centuries kept trying to get the emperor to convert and then enforce it top down? No. No, it took many, many centuries of martyrs. That's what converted the Roman Empire. So it began with the zeal and devotion in an individual sense to the Orthodox faith, by the way, not to some crazy Protestant thing or some online e-faith, which doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. And then it spills out to people around you. And so if you can't, as our friend Father Moses often makes the point, like, if you don't get along with your family, if you don't love your family and your friends, and you don't, live a moral Christian life, you have no business fussing at everybody on the internet and projecting and sassing everybody about Christ as King, because you're just being a hypocrite, right? And it's also not a thing for these annoying media pundits to chime in on. I'm not talking about anyone in particular. I'm not talking about Fuentes or anybody like that. I'm talking about some of the more neocon element, which has to chime in on this, which are super annoying. I'm talking about them. And they use it as this way to piety signal, right? And they'll be like, you say Christ is King, but are you praying on Twitter? Is what they mean, right? So there is a political application. There is a public application of these things. However, it's not like we go public political number 1 and priority, number 2 family, and then number 3 is church and individual. It's the other way around. Starts with the individual. And that doesn't mean that you can't be a politician or applying these things in the realm of the political. It means that if you're doing that, then you have to, more than anyone else, have the hierarchy of importance there first. Does that make sense? That's the key thing here. Because remember, Roman Empire doesn't convert by a bunch of people, spamming on scrolls, Christus Rex. And if you put up enough Christus Rex scrolls and graffiti throughout the Roman Empire, then Caesar will convert, and then he'll make everybody be Christian. I mean, some of these people have this completely idiotic views about. No, what you want is genuine conversions at the local individual level first, and then that will permeate the rest of society. Then, when there's a majority Orthodox society, which we're way off from that, then when that happens, then it's more appropriate to speak of the possibility of a Christian state. You can't have a Christian state without a sizable majority of the population wanting that. So that means they also can't be adherents to some ridiculous heterodox idea of Christ as King. And I'm not talking about Roman Catholics, I'm talking about Protestants. So if the majority of America is Protestant and we get, say, let's say some weird thing happened where 50% of the Protestants, this would never happen, but 50% of the Protestants agree Christ is King. Okay, how are you actually going to organize a coherent model of church-state interrelationship, Symphonia, with a bunch of lunatic Protestants? It's never going to work. And as we go through the history of the relationship between church and state in Protestant, Orthodox, and Roman Catholic confessions, we'll actually see some of that. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hit like and share if you would. We got a nice 700 here tonight. What is your prayer life like? Hey, why do you feel the need to ask me about my prayer life on an internet chat? So look, if you don't like, nobody's making you stay here. You don't have to be here. You can get out of here. And the point of this is not, like, I almost never talk about piety issues, especially not on the internet. And as you get older, you're going to get annoyed with this too. You're going to get annoyed with all the piety stuff and all the self-righteousness on Twitter and the internet. But that doesn't mean that there's not. Don't run from what are you even talking about? Come debate. We're not here to debate the Quran, dude. I literally debated all of the Muslims. So I'm not gonna come debate you with however many 100 subscribers you have. So you're just wasting our time. All right. So what's the theological teaching? What is the theological teaching? Do we actually talk about that? Now, here people are questioning, how come you won't talk about JQ? So I've explained this a million times. Certain topics, everybody knows you can't discuss those things on YouTube. And I talk about hotter, racier topics over on my Rockfin. So if you'd followed my Tragedy and Hope lectures, if you followed my recent lectures that I do live, and if you followed the recent lecture that I did on Israel and Palestine, you'll know that I got into some dicier topics. And so the question always comes up, how come you're not fully on board supporting every person out there pushing? Because you guys have it backwards, and this is what I've been trying to say for a long time. So it's not going to work to do this model of pressing the issue on without the right theology. And I know you don't think it doesn't matter. You think, oh no, all that matters is if you can own libs and get the Amish question right. Right? That's the only thing that matters. But the Amish question isn't going to save you. The Amish question isn't going to heal you. So what's the priority? And do you even want to hear what the actual teachings are? I mean, let me give you an example. So let's say we're gonna push the Amish question, and that's what we're gonna obsess over. We're gonna talk about that all day long, and we're gonna convert people to trad Catholicism or to Francis's Catholicism. Do you understand that Francis literally goes and worships in Amish synagogues? And I hope you know what I'm saying. You're not too stupid, right? So Francis is the solution? You see how this is silly? It makes absolutely no sense. So if you want to call in and remember to keep it according to TOS, so nobody gains anything by just, going against TOS and getting banned. It doesn't do anything. And I've been at this for a long time. I guarantee you I know a lot more about all this stuff than you do, man. So, if you want to call in and have a debate or something like that, we can do it. And you guys always say, why don't you do this? And I do it, but you guys never go and pay attention to the stuff that I do. So what's the point? Why are you even here? What's the point? Is this guy Jay Dyer? I am. So, all right. But see, you guys don't actually care about the history of the theology. You just want to shout on Twitter. It's like nobody even cares about what the real issue is, or what the actual teachings are. So just go shout somewhere else, man. What do you want from me? I mean, if you don't want the actual history, the actual theology, I don't know what. I mean, because that's what we always cover. So, what do you think? So you think you're gonna solve all this with a bunch of online shouting, and what, are you gonna make a common cause with a bunch of Protestants to do this? Really? You think that's gonna work? Thank you guys though for the super chats. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, look, I focus on what my wheelhouse is, and my wheelhouse is the topics that I cover. So the one of the reasons I don't focus on the political is that as you get older and as you when you're in your 20s, you're very politically minded. You think you're going to do a lot with politics. And then as you get older, you realize how, I don't mean to be black-pilled here, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I think politics it's very limited what you can really do in politics, and you can do a lot at the local level. But, national politics and everybody getting so wrapped up in it, it's really doesn't do anything. And after you get into your 30s and 40s and you live through a lot of these elections and you've seen all this nonsense, you're going to feel the same way. So you'll learn that what I'm saying is true as you get older. So does that mean that you can't be a politician and apply your classic principles? No, there's people who do this. And I support, I think it's great that people do that. I just don't think that on a national level, it's really, presidential politics is kind of a circus. So anyway, a lot of people live in these sort of fantasy worlds. They want to LARP and pretend that, and it's the same, by the way, I don't have a problem critiquing Orthodox people too. They do the same thing where they, oh bro, we're going to set up a Orthodox Byzantine Empire in America. Dude, we're not anywhere near that. Okay, we need like 70, 80% of the population converted to Orthodoxy before that would even be like on the table. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with talking about the church's teaching on the role of church and state, and that's what we're talking about tonight. What is the theological teaching of Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant? So let's look at that because, again, as you guys know, Orthodox theology is taught by the icons. So you can always look to canonical iconography to get the basics of our theology. But let's go with the Protestants first. So let's step over here to the Protestant world, even though you might think, well, why wouldn't you start with Orthodox and Roman Catholic? Well, in America, I think it's still the case that, where's my Protestant pictures? I'll pull them up. There we go. I think it's still the case that the majority of religious adherents in America, I think, are Protestant. I think that's right. So we'll start with that just because in America, that's the predominant view, right? America starts as an Enlightenment nation with a lot of Protestant influence. It's true there are a few Catholics there. There's the Carroll family that's there. So there is a bit of a Catholic history of America, but there was also a lot of Episcopalians, Baptists, Deists, Masons, right? So an odd cavalcade of characters who kind of go into the spirit of America, the founding fathers, and so forth. And so there's a strong Puritan and Protestant ethos there, especially with the Puritan work ethic, the whole idea of predestination manifesting itself in worldly blessings, right? So if you're part of the elect, if you're a city on a hill, as many of the Puritans said, even prior to 1776 or whatever, prior to that, you've got the idea already in some of the Puritans that the new Israel is kind of equated to the American experiment of people like Cotton Mathers and these characters, right? And so you get this idea of setting up a type of theocracy through the Puritans. And the Puritans are getting that out of a loose kind of dominion theology that Calvin had. And so I know all about this. I used to be a pretty committed Calvinist, dominionist. And dominion theology just refers to, a lot of people get obsessed over this. They think it's something ridiculous. And at times it is ridiculous. But it just means that the dominion mandate of Genesis still applies, to be fruitful and multiply. And certainly it does, but of course, in the Orthodox view, that's fulfilled in the church. The church is who truly has the dominion mandate. And while it's also the case that the state should operate under Christian principles, that's not the first priority of the Christian, to convert the state. We convert individuals, families, cultures, tribes, and then the state follows kind of last, you could say, in that exercise. So with the Protestants, though, what's interesting is that if we go back to the early reformers, we want to talk about Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli here. Not many people know that when the Protestant Reformation kicks off, this was not solely motivated by a desire to fight the papacy. Certainly, there were, theological obsessions that Luther had over certain doctrines like sola fide. And, he begins by questioning in the 95 Theses things like purgatory and indulgences and temporal remission of sins and all this kind of stuff. And if the Pope has the power to, dispense plenary indulgences, why doesn't he free everybody from purgatory? So Luther asks a lot of these legitimate theological questions, and it progresses into more fundamental theological questions. Luther becomes more and more hardcore Augustinian, as you guys know, becomes more predestinarian. He writes his book, Bondage of the Will, where he essentially denies free will. But what not many people know is that Luther had tremendous support from the German princes. And so the state, the German state, and these princes were really tired of the Pope. And they were a big part of the motivation and support behind Luther. And we can see kind of similar things with other Protestant reformers as well. Everybody kind of knows that, the creation of the Church of England is Henry VIII. Henry VIII is kind of annoyed at the papal situation with divorce and not granting him, what he wants with his ladies. He wants a male heir, and he's having these issues. And so Pope angers him, and he decides, I'm going to create the Church of England. And that becomes in part a looting exercise where the Church of England essentially is this new entity that then loots a lot of the Roman Catholic areas, monasteries, and it undergoes a kind of revolution that at times is sometimes called low church Anglicanism, and there's also high church Anglicanism. So you can get something, kind of a variation there, where low church Anglican is almost perhaps even Congregationalist, kind of Puritan type of government, maybe even something akin to, we couldn't say full-on, many of them are Calvinists, but we can't say they're full-on Presbyterian because Anglican kind of necessitates Episcopal church governance and the recognition of the king. Many Presbyterians who are strict followers of Luther, of course, end up being Presbyterian and preferring Republican government as opposed to monarchy. And as you guys probably know, in England, there's actual battles between the royalists and the Cavaliers versus the royalists or whatever. So you get these religious wars over the relationship of church and state and the structure of not just the church, but also the state. For example, in the times of the Westminster Confession, which is the sort of normative doctrine of Reformed Presbyterian theology, that's their primo confession. There were many people there very worried that there might be a concession to Erastianism. And Erastianism, if you don't know, is just Caesaropapism, the idea that the king, the ruler, whoever it might be, president of the republic, even perhaps, that he's now the head of the church. And so the Westminster Confession contains within it, I think, if I'm going from, I haven't looked at Westminster Confession in probably 15 years, but they have these guards against the king or the ruler having any authority in the church. But they still have the idea that the state has a duty to God, and it's not autonomous. In the Protestant theories, both, I would say, Luther and Calvin, you could argue that there's still, even this early on, a kind of loose, I wouldn't say theocracy. In other words, I would say Calvin is more of a proponent of theocracy, maybe even than Luther. Luther's not super concerned with the state, but he does think the state has a duty to kind of promote the basic ideas of Christian morals, the Ten Commandments, and this kind of stuff. And so, ironically, even though Luther was supported by the German princes against the Pope, Calvin actually ends up being more of a theocrat than Luther does. And this is where we get Puritanism. And there's a lot of internecine disputes that a lot of people don't know about or even care. Nobody even cares about this. But within the Reformed and Calvinist world, there's actually debates over to what degree Calvin was a theonomist. Theonomist just means a person who believes that the Old Testament civil law teachings are in varying degrees still kind of applicable to today's society. So basically just theocracy to some degree. Now, Calvin doesn't think that the church and the state kind of like, he thinks they have spheres. And most people, I think, in church history recognize some role of spheres here until we get to the radical reformers. So until we get to the Anabaptists, whether you're Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic, most people think, okay, there's kind of sort of loose canonical, if you're Orthodox or Catholic, barriers between what the king or ruler can and can't do and what the bishops and the priests can and can't do. So there's kind of loosely defined ideas. It is true that in the late Middle Ages and into the Middle Ages, there's it's fuzzy at times because you have at times monks who become warrior monks. That's unheard of and forbidden in the Orthodox world, but it exists by the 11th, 12th century in the Latin West. There's a great chapter on that in this book. I highly recommend the Meyendorff Papadakis book on this period of 1100 to 1453 to the collapse of Byzantium. There's a whole chapter on the new element of the rise of the warrior monk, and that was actually one of the elements of the new Gregorian papacy. So they were big supporters of this because it now allowed for another type of, we could say, army, so to speak, on the behalf of the Pope. So there have been times where there's crossing the boundaries of the bishops becoming princes that fight. And that, to be clear here, is actually a violation of canon law. We'll look at that in a minute. We don't want to go there right now, but because we're going to stay on the Protestant stuff. But all the way up until even Calvin and Luther, you have this loose idea that there's limitations, spheres of authority. And even though there's violations and sort of overstepping the boundaries, most of church history has some kind of recognition of this, at least church history in the sense of when we start to get canon law. Because the first 3 centuries, even though there's canons that we have, say, at the local synods, we don't yet have what we call a codified canon law because the church is still persecuted and underground. So they're not going to be formulating, really laid out theories of church and state. Now, technically speaking, Paul and the apostles in the Old Testament already kind of have taught about the role of ecclesia and state. Because even in the Old Testament, there's clear defined roles between the king and the priest. If you didn't know, this is already in Mosaic law. Moses in the law writes out the book of law for kings and what their duties and boundaries are. Okay, so those principles, again, they're already in the Old Testament. They come out of Mosaic law, for those that don't know. The apostles, I believe, are in continuity with those basic ideas, and hence why Paul says that, Caesar, he calls Caesar, for those that don't know, in Romans 13, a diakonos, a deacon. So Caesar is seen as a servant of God to dispense divine justice. Now, he might be a terrible example of that role, right? As many of the Roman emperors were. They became tyrants. They became persecutors of the church. But even Paul in Romans 13 can call Nero a kind of diakonos, even though he's a wicked degenerate. And I believe that Nero is the Antichrist of the book of Revelation, because in Gematria, and yes, John in the book of Revelation uses Gematria as a code to speak for who he's talking about, because he couldn't outright say, I'm talking about Nero as Antichrist. Nero's name in Hebrew comes out to Neron Kusar, which is 666. So it's a key indicator, and I believe John was writing in the days of Nero, that Nero was the immediate historical beast. Doesn't mean that Nero is the final Antichrist. There will be some final Antichrist figure at some point. But Nero is a type of Antichrist, as were people like Ptolemy, as were people like Nimrod. That's how biblical typology works. It kind of repeats in patterns. So, back to Protestants and Protestantism. Protestantism then early on what we call classical Protestant. Classical Protestantism is the period of Martin Luther, John Calvin, Zwingli, and a couple of the other figures like Melanchthon and people contemporaries of that first generation of Reformation. And then maybe some of the people even a generation after are also kind of classical Protestants, you could say, like Melanchthon, or maybe even Turretin, Francis Turretin being a classical Calvinist theologian. So sometimes that becomes scholastic Protestantism. So the scholastic Protestants, the Puritans, the Calvinists, they develop a much more kind of fleshed out idea of what the role of church and state is, and it's typically pretty theocratic, right? For example, Calvin has sermons on Deuteronomy where he pretty consistently says that the principles in Deuteronomy still apply. Okay, so you don't have to necessarily apply every single penal sanction, but the basic idea of the application of the penal sanctions to today still applies. That's why Puritans, for example, if you've all seen, Scarlet Letter and then heard about the Salem witch trial, that's why the idea was that the civil penalties for public witchcraft and so forth still apply. And that was true in the Roman Catholic world as well, because in the Middle Ages you did have oftentimes civil penalties for things like witchcraft and so forth. Now people say, yeah, and we should punish adultery too and all that. Now, there have been civil penalties for adultery in canon law and so forth, and even in civil law in the Middle Ages, as well as skittles. But the other interesting distinction here is that in Orthodox views of this, the punishment is determined by the sphere. So, for example, if someone was excommunicated from the church, it's not the role of the church to punish people. Okay, the excommunication is itself kind of a punishment. So the church might say to, a ruler or a duke or somebody, I don't know, maybe a duke becomes a heretic and the Orthodox Church says, okay, you're excommunicated. And then, or I don't know, some other heretic or something. It's then the state that can then determine the penalty of that in a civil sense. So that's, again, spheres of authority. And again, between the Orthodox and the Roman Catholic throughout the Middle Ages, I tend to view this as not that different. I don't think it's the case that there is some difference between, say, the Roman Catholic papal calls for crusades. We don't see anything like that really in the East, per se. You do have battles with Muslims on the basis of, say, Serbian kings fighting Islam. So I wouldn't go so far as to say that even all war is like wrong or bad or anything like that. I think that there is defensive, justified war and so forth. But there is an agreement, I would say, typically between East and West on the basic ideas of things like the duty of the state to operate under Christian principles, because the majority of the populations are Christian. Okay, so it's not being enforced or pushed or promulgated because of some sort of top-down thing. It's because the societies are Christian, majority. So when we start to see Protestantism come about and react against what I believe is an earlier papal revolution, part of the reason Protestantism occurs, in my view, is precisely because of the Gregorian reforms. So if you're familiar with the Gregorian reforms, you know that in the period of the 1100s, you get about 100 years where the Germanic tribes literally appoint the Pope for about 100 years. And so this, by the way, undercuts the ridiculous idea that Roman Catholics were never under any kind of Caesaro-papism. No, it's just papalo-Caesarism, where Otto and all these other kings were basically just appointing who they wanted as the Pope to control the office of the papacy. We have a similar situation when the papacy moves to France, in Avignon for 70 years. The See of Peter in France, right? And it's become such a mess, it's known as the Great Western Schism, where you have three people claiming to be the Pope, two anti-popes, who knows? And it takes an ecumenical council, the Council of Constance, to solve this, which is ironic because, of course, Roman Catholic theology says that councils are above the Pope. So when there's three rival popes, what do? They turn to a council. So, but remember, popes are still above councils. So it's all a bunch of casuistry and it's absurd, but it's based around this idea that we see in Dictatus Papae of the Gregorian reforms. And this is Pope Gregory VII. Again, there's great chapters on this in the Mindorf Papadakis book. And it makes essentially all these outlandish claims which don't just apply to church and state. It actually points out that the papacy, the Pope, is actually the Quixotes Haderach. He's the universus super being. All the emperors and kings in the world submit to the Pope. They all must kiss his ring. He decides who rules in every country in the world. His is the only name in the world. He may depose all emperors. He determines all bishops in the world. And again, hopefully we all know how foreign this is to the canons of the councils. Okay, and we just covered this in the debate in the debate review with Luigi, where we went through multiple canons. The ancient canons, apostolic canons, for example, canon 3435, says that no bishop can go outside of his own see. Even the first bishop cannot go outside of his own see. And let him do all things in accord with all the rest. Okay, well that's synodalism. That's not Vatican I, where the Pope does not need the consent of the other bishops. Okay, canon 34, as we covered the other night. 34/35, depending on the numberings. And you'll notice that, again, it's the Roman Church has never erred. All these things go together. This is a valid, absolutely correct, that it's papal teaching. Every scholar that you look up that discusses Dictatus Papae will talk about it as, I've never seen anybody say it's not valid. So, Szyszynski talks about it, Papadakis, Mindorf, they all talk about it as valid as far as we can tell. But this renovation, this evolution here of the role of church and state, you see that this is an innovation. Because prior to this, the Pope didn't even call the ecumenical councils, the emperor did. And if we look at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, it speaks of the emperor as the God-ordained emperor, the voice and pen of God, right? All this flowery language that Luigi brought up in the live stream covering his debate with Voice of Reason. Yeah, exactly. The Pope is the Quixotes Haderach. He's the one. Who is this Muad'Dib? Right, as Christopher Walken says. He's the God Emperor. But no one had ever seen anything like Dictatus Papae in the first 1,000 years. And that shows that the doctrine of the papacy is an evolution. And if that's the case, then the entire premise of what, for example, Voice of Reason and Ibarra argue, that was always there. Well, no, if this is not always there, then it wasn't always there, you say. Oh, well, then it evolved. Okay, well, it evolved, and it wasn't always there. So, and I want to show you that, just an example, the canons of Chalcedon, for example, limit all clergy. And you'll notice in every one of the canons of the council that speaks about clergy and bishops and their roles and their limitations, there's never exemptions for the Bishop of Rome. So all the Roman Catholics who discuss this, they always say, well, it's an argument from silence because they already all understood it. Okay, but so they understood that the Roman See had total supremacy and jurisdiction. But they also enacted canons that contradict that, so the Pope had to throw out the canons that he didn't like in literally every council. But they also believed in papal supremacy, as they enact canons that contradict it. So you see how these arguments are spacious, absurd, and contradictory from the Roman Catholics. And that's why Chalcedon, they love to appeal to Chalcedon. Well, it says that if you're clergy, you cannot be in the military or in any secular position. Well, how can you not? And there's no exemption for the Pope, by the way. So if you can't be in the military or in any secular profession, state role, then how is it that you're the Quixotes Haderach and the emperor of all emperors? How is it that every emperor in the world submits to you and you can depose them? How is it that, Alexander, Pope Alexander, can have his own standing armies? Standing armies? Do you think that Chalcedon at all had in mind the possibility that the Pope could have standing armies? And by the way, they were so ridiculous in the time of Alexander, the Borgia Pope, that he would excommunicate the people that wouldn't fight for him. I mean, you talk about corruption. So, like, it's not just a matter of, oh, well, they were corrupt. Okay, but it's not just a matter of corruption. It's a matter of what the absurd claims of Dictatus Papae are. And it's not just Dictatus Papae either, by the way. Again, we've hammered this home a million times, and it just goes in one area, out the other. And we have to talk about this because this is the reason why the Protestants had such a overreaction against this stuff. They're both wrong, in our view. In 1302, Pope Boniface published his famous statement called Unum Sanctum. And not only does Unum Sanctum teach that you have to be in union with the Roman See to be saved, and not just in a generic, it's not like all the world religions are somehow loosely in a union. No, public communion with the Roman See is what this document's talking about. Because the Vatican II people will try to say, oh, well, everybody is in a kind of union with the Bishop of Rome, even the Muslims, right? That's the Vatican II, like all the churches in every world religion is kind of loosely in union with Francis. That's the Vatican II model of everybody being on a graded scale, concentric circles away from Rome in the center, which is ridiculous. Because there's canons in the first 7 councils that forbid you from going to, as if you're a cleric, to worship in the synagogue or the churches of heretics. And every post-Vatican II pope has gone and prayed in the mosque, in the synagogue, and with heretics, violating the ancient canons, because they don't care what canons say. They don't care that it was a unanimous teaching of the early church that you can't go and worship in a mosque towards Mecca. That's crazy. And you tell us Roman Catholics, what's the problem? So? You mean the guy that called the office, the Pope calls a crusade against Islam, but now you can build a multi-faith center and pray in mosques with Muslims towards Mecca. You don't see that as a contradiction, Roman Catholics. Nope, not at all. Nope. Yeah, exactly. And that's why, to answer the original guy's question, how are you going to make a common course with telling people that Christianity is what Francis offers? Unum Sanctum doesn't just talk about the necessity to be in communion with the Roman See to be saved. It also talks about it is necessary for the state to submit to the Pope. So people cite this document and they think, oh, this is one of those, Cantate Domino Council of Florence documents that says that you have to be in communion with Rome to be saved. Ha ha ha, no salvation outside the church. Extra ecclesiam nullis salus. Okay, yeah, but it also says that you have to be in union with the Roman See to be a legitimate ruler, and the Pope will decide who the ruler is, and that you have to believe in the temporal supremacy of the Pope to be saved as well, you see. Now the question is, does that still apply? Well, as we're going to see in a minute, no, the Roman Catholic Church does not anymore teach the temporal supremacy, Dictatus Papae, Unum Sanctum view of the Roman Catholic papacy. Because, are you familiar with the triple tiara? Did you know what the triple tiara is? Triple tiara is the threefold supremacy that the Pope has, and one of those 3 crowns is the authority over all state rulers. The post-Vatican II popes, I think it was Paul VI, took this thing off. So it's very symbolic that Paul VI, the real Pope of Vatican II, John XXIII calls it, and then Paul VI finishes it. It's very significant that he took this thing off. And to my knowledge, they've not worn it since, right? So you can see John the 23rd looks like was the last one that had it on. Maybe Paul VI wore it some, but he's the one that dispensed with it. Yeah. So here's John the 23rd wearing the triple crown, and that's been dispensed with. I don't know if they auctioned it off or sold it, or if it's just sitting in the Vatican, or what it is, where it is. But this is photoshopped. That's not him actually wearing it. You can tell it's photoshopped on there. But this has to do with the Vatican II teaching post Dignitatis Humanae and post Nostra Aetate, that they no longer mandate and stress the Christian state. In fact, Benedict and others, people think Benedict was a super trap. Benedict was actually calling for the de-Catholicization of many European states. Now, there's a million lines of cope. Well, he was doing that because they're not Christian anymore, and it looks bad to call it Catholic. No. That's not why they're doing this. They're doing this because the Vatican II teaching is religious liberty, indifferentism, and so forth. And we'll see that in a minute. Because the very thing that papal encyclicals, dogmatic teaching, Mirari Vos, Lamentabili, Syllabus of Errors, right? These all condemn religious liberty, freedom of thought, freedom of press, and so forth as heresies. Vatican II, Dignitas Humanae, says, no, this is the true spirit of Christ, is to have religious liberty. Now, here's the problem, though. Religious liberty, now that's a bit of a vague term, because does that mean that you can do whatever you want? Well, it's always been vague. And religious liberty and freedom of press, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, those were all Protestant doctrines. They're Protestantism 101. The Protestant rulers and reformers made sure to stress, but they weren't consistent with it, but they made sure to stress that we are not submitting to the Pope because we have freedom of worship, freedom of conscience, and we don't have to believe it just because the Pope says it. We have to be convinced of it. Now, they weren't consistent, though, because Calvin had Servetus put to death. And Michael Servetus could appeal to the same principles that Calvin was appealing to against the Pope. Right? Michael Servetus said, well, I'm not convinced of the Trinity. John Calvin says Michael Servetus ought to be put to death because he's denying the dogma of the Trinity. Well, the Pope says that the Calvinists would be put to death because they're denying multiple Roman Catholic dogmas. So you see how freedom of worship, freedom of conscience, freedom of the press, etc., in principle, okay, they sound good, and there might be a sense in which we have those, but they're ambiguous just as phrases. What does that mean? Does freedom of worship mean that I'm free to erect satanic temples and worship Satan and offer human sacrifice? Some people think so. Literally. Right? And if you read some of the documents of Vatican II, it's hard to see how that doesn't also apply. Because one of the documents, I can't remember if it's Dignitas Humanae or the one, the Integratio one, or what. One of them talks about how there should be no restrictions on other groups, sects, and cults in society. And some people make the argument that, well, this was during the Cold War, and they were saying all this so that they could help convince the Soviets to let the church be free. And that's not why they were doing that. They weren't teaching religious liberty because of Soviets. Okay, give me a break. If that was the case, then they should walk it back now that there's no Soviet empire anymore. Did they do that? No. No. The popes still call for the de-Christianization of the state. They still call for religious liberty, freedom of worship, and so forth. Now, you say, well, what's the problem? Well, as we see here, so here's Dignitatis Humanae. This is the Vatican II document, which is about, supposedly on the basis of the dignity of the individual, the human being, he should never be compelled, never be in any way, that the church or religious teaching should never have any, quote, violence connected to it. Now, this is ambiguous as well because, of course, the church shouldn't go out and, like, chop people's heads off. But the problem is that this is the very argumentation of the Protestants as to why there should be no dogmatic connection to the state. Now, they weren't consistent with that, but as the Protestant Reformation progresses, who are the other reformers that many of us know about but often forget about after Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, Melanchthon, etc.? The Anabaptists. The Anabaptists, even though we don't think of them as the Reformation, They're actually a gigantic portion of the Reformation, which arguably you could say has had now more. The theology of Anabaptism, I would argue, is actually now more popular, maybe inadvertently, nowadays than the actual theology of Luther and Calvin. How's that? Well, Anabaptists taught that, as we said, this is what's called the Radical Reformation, right? And it's very important to know about the Radical Reformation because the Reformation, again, it's not just Luther and Calvin and the famous guys. When you start to look at the Radical Reformation, you start realizing, hey, wait a minute. These dudes, they actually sound like Baptists, evangelicals, charismatics, and most of American Christianity. Now, it's true that we don't have a direct lineal descent necessarily to the radical reformers, right? There are some groups that exist today that still do have a historical lineage to the radical reformers. The Hutterites, the Amish, the Mennonites, they come from the radical reformers. And it's true that the Amish and Mennonites and Hutterites are not the big group out there, right? They're small groups. Quakers, Shakers, right? I think there's like 3 people left of the Shakers. Literally, there's only 3 Shakers left from the historic Shaker community, which is like some lunatic split of Quakers. But even President, Richard Nixon, for example, grew up as a Quaker, the Quaker Oats guy. I think Cadbury Chocolates in England is also a Quaker company. But so how is it then? How could you say that the Radical Reformation is really dominant today? Because the theology of the Radical Reformation. Let's look at some of the commonalities that. Now this is a bunch of wacky groups, right? So keep that in mind. But what are some of the commonalities amongst the wacky groups of the Radical Reformation? We'll take a look. So the Radical Reformers were like, hey, wait a minute. Of course, we don't like Rome, right? We don't like the papacy. That's a big antichrist institution. I can't get Oxford to pull up, so we're just going to use Wikipedia just for the overall view here. We don't like the Pope, but you know what? Martin Luther's got a lot of papal baggage, doesn't he? He's got images, and he thinks there's sacraments, and there's baptismal regeneration, and there's Luther likes some traditions, and he just didn't go far enough. Because Luther thought that there was like dogmas and traditions still. Luther didn't understand that the real Christianity is the inner light and move of the Holy Spirit. That's charismaticism. Luther didn't understand that what we need is a communal type of living. That's Thomas Müntzer and communism. And Luther didn't understand that we don't need tradition. We need the Bible alone and a personal relationship with Jesus that really doesn't have much to do with the church at all. The church is kind of optional. That's Baptists and Southern Baptists. And out of Southern Baptists, Campbellites, Church of Christ, non-denominational churches, megachurches. The dominant type of Christianity in America is this quasi-Gnostic, Anabaptist-ish radical Reformation theology. Let's look at some more commonalities. Many of the early forms of the Radical Reformation were millenarian, so Chiliasm, premillennialism. Even though there was a few early church fathers who might have, it's debated, might have had a premillennial or a millennialist type of view, doesn't matter. The Constantinople I in 381 excludes all form of millennialism. When the creed says, whose kingdom shall have no end, that is intended to exclude the millennialists, the millenarians, the Chiliasts. But most of the Protestants and evangelicals in America, they're dispensationalists, they're premillennialists, etc. So radical Reformation theology makes a comeback. What else did they believe? Many of these groups believed in biblical literalism. Others believed in, quote, spiritualism. And some of those groups even said that you don't need the scriptures at all. You need the direct move of the Holy Spirit, which might be manifestations of shaking. It might be manifestations of gibberish. It might be manifestations of you think God's talking to you and telling you what to do. Wait a minute. That sounds like the majority of evangelicalism, exactly. The non-Anabaptist radical reformers, these are also very important because they relate very closely to the topic today. Though most of the radical reformers were Anabaptists, some of them were not. Munzer, for example, was involved in the German Peasants' War. So even though he was a proto-communist, the Thomas Munzer Rebellion resulted in the idea that you could fight in battles and stuff. Andreas Karlstadt disagreed theologically with Zwingli and Luther, teaching nonviolence and refusing infant baptism. So this is where we get Luther, by the way, who says Zwingli should be put to death, and that the Baptists and Anabaptists who wouldn't baptize children should be put to death. So keep that in mind. These were considered death-worthy disagreements at that time. And remember that because Protestants are always saying, there's a loose, lowest common denominator idea of what a Protestant is. We all believe in the Bible, and we all believe in baptism. Used to kill each other over baptism of infants. What are you talking about? And there's no common, it's all a bunch of lunatics. And by the way, just because there's some commonalities doesn't mean there's one group. Remember the move that Bryson did, the Bryson debate, where he tried to play this trick? Any group, loosely speaking, that had a Judaizing tendency was the group that Bryson's in communion with. That's not a single group, dude. That's a bunch of different disconnected sects all over the place. I'm with them. That's my group. Come on, dude. Now, here's the key point with the dissenters, the English Reformation, Radical Reformation, the English dissenters. These people, Quakers and others, George Fox, Roger Williams, what's their key point? Well, we can understand why they might think this. They're getting persecuted by the Presbyterian theocracy of Calvin. They get persecuted by Martin Luther and his German princes. Get drowned because they won't baptize their infants. They get persecuted by the Roman Catholics because Roman Catholics just say they're idiotic heretics. And it's not necessarily the churches that are doing it, it's the German state, the theocracy of Calvin, the state, and the Catholic kings. So guess what their theology is? The Antichrist is the state. God has nothing to do with the state, because how could God be the state or have a role in the state when the state keeps persecuting us and we're the true keepers of the true flame? We're the true Christians, the true pious people. But notice what's happening with the Christianity of these idiotic radical reformers is it's having nothing to do with history. Remember Paul Washer literally saying, Jay, I'm coming to believe in the Radical Reformation that the Anabaptists were correct all along. It was a blackout, Jay. The church was blacked out. Give me money for hard crime missions. Right? Literally saying that he believes Anabaptist blackout theory. The piety signalers of all piety signalers, the Anabaptists, persecuted by the state. And what do we get? We get Roger Williams saying that the state is anti-God. The state is antichrist. Interestingly, the Anabaptist theology of the state as against God and kind of antichrist, this is synonymous with kind of a lot of Americanist ideas, isn't it? So, for example, I have mentioned this many times to you guys. I won't say who, but some years ago in 2017, 18, I met an OCA priest, and we had a long exchange, a pretty heated argument. And he had the same ideas as Roger Williams, that God has nothing to do with the state. It's basically an antichrist institution. I'm like, so you're saying Roger Williams is Orthodox? This is crazy. And how contrary to the entire history of the Orthodox Church is this? Just completely night and day with like the Seventh Ecumenical Council, the entire Byzantine Empire. And my point is not to say that all of the Byzantine emperors were saints. And that, no, I'm not saying that. Obviously, it fell. There was corruption, right? But the point is that how could you think that Munzer, not Munzer, I'm sorry, because Munzer fought in the Peasant War, but how could you think that George Fox and Roger Williams, and that is what Orthodox Christianity teaches? So what happens is, a lot of times in America especially, priests, people are trained up, and their Americanism comes first. So they're doing the same mistake, making the same move, the same mistake, in my view, that people who would say Christ is king make, by thinking that the political comes first. And turning Christ into like a beige trad political thing. That's not what it is. That's an effect of authentic Christianity. But it's not first and foremost. That's down the road. You see what I'm saying? If you think of it as first and foremost a political thing, as soon as you begin to fail in the political domain, now Jesus is well, he doesn't have anything to do with this. You see, you would be led to the logic of Roger Williams. And neither of these positions is correct. Neither Roger Williams nor the idea that Jesus is like my political banner that I'm going to enact the beige and trad political party stuff with. This is the very move that the Pope made erroneously 1,000 years ago, to turn the papacy into a geopolitical state organization. That's the mistake. And saying that the mistake of the papacy to become a geopolitical power organization is not solved by saying that Orthodox need to be Americanists and reject the Christian state. That's the opposite error. The very error that the priest I'm talking about made. So hopefully that's clear. Hopefully you guys see that, right? I think we got up to about almost 900. So we got people kind of popping in and out, I guess. And we're going to open it up for people to discuss. Now, if you want to support the show, you can do so by super chats there. Now, there's a lot of specifics that there's not easy, direct answers to in terms of these questions. Like somebody will always say, well, what is the limits of the state? There's never going to be some like one size fits all answer to this. History is diverse. You're going to have places and times in history when the state has less power, when the state has more power. My personal view, I would like to see the state have less power. That does not make me a libertarian. Now, we got to talk about libertarianism because this is the next mistake that people make in this domain, where their assumption is that the Enlightenment was somehow like the high point of all of civilization. And in my view, again, I see the Enlightenment kind of like the Reformation, where you've got a reaction against papal problems, as the Reformation was. But the reaction is also a problem, right? And everybody's always falling into either ors, right? Well, if the papacy is bad, then I guess the reformers were good. Papacy is bad, the Masons must be good. Or you can have two people that are bad. You can have two wrong sides, okay? People can't figure this out. Like most people just default to thinking that somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Good guy, bad guy. Black, white. You can have 5 people arguing something and they're all wrong. Obviously. Right? Isn't that possible? Sure. Have you ever heard 5 pundits on a Twitter space all being idiots, all being wrong? Of course. Right. So just because there's extremes in the papacy in the Middle Ages doesn't make the Reformation response automatically correct. Obviously. Perhaps both sides have things right. perhaps both sides have things wrong. But maybe not. In some cases, there might be a party that has everything correct, loosely speaking, right? It's just not an easy either or, is what I'm trying to say. Now, in regard again to moving back to the papacy position, because remember, as the Reformation progresses, as the Radical Reformation happens, you get these mixes. You get, Europe kind of being split Protestant. You get the years of the wars in Europe over religion, 30 Years' War, etc. You get, and I read entire books on this many years ago. I've forgotten a lot of it in my history classes, but I read a whole book on 30 Years' War, which is all fascinating and ties into all this. You've got people who reject the Anabaptist stuff and the Protestant stuff and the Catholic stuff, and they start getting into Hermeticism. So you start to get the rise of Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism. So remember, there's this cauldron. You've got the atheist Enlightenment people. You've got a cauldron of interests here. It's all mixing and bubbling over and battling. And so what the Roman Church does in response, which is understandable, and I think as Orthodox, we actually agree with a lot of the basics here. So if you read this book that I'm always recommending, The Popes Against the Modern Errors, a lot of the basic principles that they call out, critiquing the Protestant and Enlightenment presuppositions, is all covered in this document. 16 papal documents from about 1700 up to, I think there's some Pius the 11th in there. So it ends with some of the Pius 11th stuff, I think. I read it twice, but I read it twice like 15 years ago. It used to be a book I would give out when I was a trad cat. And the reason I give this out is that it's so clear and to the point, contrasted with Vatican II. Okay, so if you want one book that really contrasts the essential contradictions between the documents of Vatican II and the pre-papal teaching, it's this book right here from Tan Books, classic, famous, traditional Catholic publisher. Every Catholic knows who Tan Books is. So the 16 documents here don't just call out the idea of modernism, liberalism, Freemasonry, I think is included in there, Humani Generis, or Humanum Janus, excuse me, Leo the 13th, I think that's in there. But by the way, there's actually like 10 encyclicals going back to the 1700s. Pope Clement calling out and rejecting Freemasonry. The first, I think, is from Pope Clement, and there's a whole series of these all the way up to, again, famous encyclicals like Mirari Vos of Gregory the 16th in 1832. And liberalism and religious indifferentism here, this is one of the earliest call-outs of what we might call the proto-ecumenist idea. So even though ecumenism is not an organized movement yet in the 1830s, you kind of have the predecessors to it with things like Freemasonry, things like Protestantism. Branch theory already exists. And in the 1830s, the papacy was very adamant to oppose these things and call them out. Now, this is in the minds of the popes in these documents, fully expressing the universal Catholic tradition. So even though there's not a statement at the beginning of these documents that says, this is an ex cathedra statement, we proclaim this for the whole church from the chair of Peter, it doesn't really have to, because it's papal teaching expressing what is the universal teaching to condemn errors. And the errors condemned are all the things that you would expect: religious liberty, freedom of worship, total freedom of conscience, modernism, and so forth. And what's called indifferentism here, which is the idea connected to liberty of conscience that you can be saved in all kinds of different paths and churches and groups. Now, he's not even talking about salvation in false religions. He's talking about salvation in various branches of the church and amongst schismatic groups. So branch theory. He talks about liberty of conscience. He talks about freedom of the press. So you understand that the papacy in 1832, going back to citing Clement XIII, about the banning of heterodox books, the Holy Office, banning Masonic texts and so forth. Attacking the idea that the public must submit to kings and princes. So it's a monarchical text. God has established the monarchical rule. Now this is just one of 16 papal documents that specifically condemn all the errors that we're talking about. Now, as we get down, what is the key error that he wants to highlight towards the end of the document? The separation of church and state, identified by the Pope here as a heresy. What is Dignitatis Humanae about? The separation of church and state, the de-Catholicizing of Christian states. This is Vatican II document, for those that don't know, 1965, Paul VI. And of course, it's been reiterated by all the post-Vatican II popes that there no longer needs to be Christian and Catholic states because it's not good for pluralism. This is why John Courtney Murray was so important at Vatican II in terms of his Jesuit theology, was that he was a big promoter, as well as I think Jacques Maritain, of religious pluralism, and that modern states and societies needed to adopt religious pluralism. Does it at all sound like Morari Vos of 1832 and Pope Gregory the 16th? Does this all sound like pluralism to you? To condemn the separation of church and state as a heresy? Again, if you've never read these, if you're a Roman Catholic, it's time to start reading some of these, bro. So that's Morari Vos as one example. Now keep in mind, this is not a one-off, okay? Popes Against the Modern Errors has 16 papal documents just like this, including some of the documents that are attached to Vatican I, like the Syllabus of Errors, if I recall. So let's look at the Syllabus of Errors. Quanta Cura. Quanta Cura is the encyclical of Pope Pius IX, the Pope of Vatican I. And the trads will argue that this is part of Vatican I. I'm sure Novus Ordo Catholics don't even care. But I think the trads are correct on this. I think it is intended to be part of Vatican. It's the Pope condemning ideas that are heterodox. So, surely the Pope knows, right? Shouldn't he know? It's the Pope of Vatican I. Wouldn't Pius IX know? Let's look at some of the errors that are condemned. We're going to start down at the bottom because it gets really spicy towards the end. Errors concerning modern liberalism. And in every one of the errors, he actually mentions other papal documents to show that it's in concord with previous papal teaching and his own papal teaching. It is no longer expedient that the Catholic religion should be held as the religion of the state to the exclusion of all other forms of worship. Condemned. There you go, right there. Condemned. It has been wisely decided by law that in Catholic countries, people should be able to retain their own particular types of worship. Condemned. These are condemned propositions. You understand that? I know there's a lot of slow people in the audience, but slow boys, these are condemned propositions. He's not teaching this. This is the condemned proposition. Moreover, it is false that every civil liberty of every form of worship given to all and overtly of all publicly manifesting any opinions whatsoever, total freedom of thought, and to the propagation of indifferentism. Condemned. Total freedom of press. The Pope should reconcile himself with progress, liberalism, and modernism. Condemned. Now, everything that is condemned is the very thing that the post-Vatican II papacy has done. Let's see. Errors concerning natural ethics, Christian ethics, moral laws do not come from God. They're atheistic. Science and philosophy are immune to the divine authority and the church authority. Condemned. So again, all of these kind of relate. They kind of go together, right? Authority is nothing but a sum total of material forces. So authority coming from the people up. That it's not a top-down thing. from God. Rights just exist in material facts. There's no rights and duties beyond material facts. So let's see. Errors about marriage. This talks about divorce. But I want to get over here to the state as the origin and source of all rights is not ascribed by any limits. Condemned. So you can't have statism without the role of the divine authority of the church. The teaching of the Catholic Church is hostile to social order. Condemned. The civil government, even if it's run by an infidel, has a right to indirect negative power over the church. Condemned. In the case of a conflicting challenge of law between the two powers of church and state, the state prevails. Condemned. The state has authority to shut down and tell the church what to do. Condemned. The state can interfere in the administration of the sacraments. Condemned. State can make decisions about religious seminaries. Condemned. The best theory of civil society is one which is completely open and free from all ecclesiastical authority. In other words, a complete separation of church and state. Condemned. By the way, that's Americanism. Catholics can approve of the system of education that is without the religious Catholic faith. Condemned. So, state schools. Condemned. The civil power may prevent the bishops of the church from speaking to and communicating with the Bishop of Rome. Condemned. Laity and state civil people, is talking about, possess the right of presenting the bishops. Condemned. Laity can depose bishops. Condemned. Government can, by its own right, alter the age prescribed by the church of the religious profession of men and women. So another one about taking vows and when you're a Christian and stepping into the affairs of the church. Anyway, it's on and on, right? Kings and princes are exempted from the church. Condemned. Church must be separated from the state and the state from the church. Condemned. So, does this sound like the same teaching as Vatican II's Dignitatis Humanae, the Declaration on Total Religious Freedom? No. Independence of church and state. So the very thing condemned is the very thing said to be the teaching of the church and Christ in Dignitatis Humanae. So this is essentially a surrendering of, between Mirari Vos and Lamentabili and the other 16 papal documents up to the time of Vatican II. And here's the irony, is that nobody's mentioned quas primas, except a few trads, I'm sure. So as late as 1925, get this. As late as 1925, the papacy instituted a feast called Christ the King. Every trad Catholic knows about Christ the King. Quas primas. And this was intended to prop up the traditional teaching that the state cannot be separate from the church can't be separated from the state. That you can't make a atheistic independent state separate from the church if you're a Christian and a Catholic. So as late as 1925, Pius XI was still upholding the things that we just saw in Mirari Vos and in Lamentabili Syllabus Severus. Now, Feast of Christ the King is 1925. So it only took from 1925 to what year is 1965? Okay. 25 to 6, so 40 years. So imagine we're supposed to believe that the Holy Spirit is guiding the Roman Catholic Church, but between 1925 and 1965, in 1925, the Holy Spirit wants Christian Catholic states. But by 1965, that should be done away with. That's not a contradiction. Even though the 1965 position is called a demonic delusion and condemned. So, now I know that there's a million Catholic copes for this. I made all those same copes. I tried for many, many years to make this work. But if you're a Protestant, you're sitting here saying, aha, I like it, Jay. I like what you're saying. Yeah, down with them papers. Get rid of them papers, man. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Wait a minute. As a Protestant, who are you going to look to? What's your teaching? You're not in any better position. In fact, you're in a worse position. Because we at least agree with the basic traditional Roman Catholic teaching as Orthodox, traditionally minded Orthodox that aren't just worshipers of the American deep state or of the State Department like the EP and marching to the tune of whatever the State Department says. I mean, they basically are a state church. They're the state church of the State Department. So, how are you as a Protestant in a better position? Because as a Protestant, you don't really have any clear way to deal with this. And if you look at the history of the Protestant nations, they were miserable failures. I'm not talking about monetary failures. So I'm not making a Roman Catholic argument of like, we've got more money and we got more numbers, so we win. No. The relationship between church and state in the Protestant nations failed. Why? Because as soon as the state became the sort of arbiter and adjudicator of the church, because the early Protestant Reformation was Erastian or Caesaropapist, there was always going to be this struggle between the two. And ultimately, you can go back to Dictatus Papae. That's a struggle between church and state, where the Pope just says, I'm the state and the church. It's a single-headed eagle, and now I'm both heads in one. But the Byzantine double-headed eagle is the classic Byzantine symbol, which expresses the Orthodox view. Not saying that it's always been done right, but expresses the Orthodox view of two spheres that operate in their own boundaries that ideally work in harmony in Symphonia. Symphonia is the meaning of the Orthodox view. That's the term that signifies the meaning of the Orthodox view of church and state, ideally. It's the idea here is that when we have a majority Christian society, the ruler will be operating on Christian principles in his sphere. So that means that he will be able to determine punishments for evildoers. He will be able to have a role almost like a deacon. If you remember, in the Byzantine Empire, the emperor could go behind the iconostasis. He was considered a type of deacon. But he cannot tell the church what to do. He can't change the church. And emperors that tried to do that ended up excommunicated. Arian emperors, iconoclast emperors. If the Orthodox Church was run by emperors, they would have turned it into all kinds of insane heresies. Right. It would have been Arian, it would have been iconoclast. Or even worse. Who knows? So it doesn't mean that the ruler will always be faithful to his Christianity any more than even Caesar as a diakonos in the sense of the pagan Caesars, right? They still had a role, but they were wicked. And so it was right to defy them at times. Okay, so it's not a worship of authority. If it's a worship of authority, which by the way is what the papal system is, the whole papal system is based around the worship of human authority and historical authority. No, at times it is right to oppose authority when they go against a higher authority. So that's the principle. Even Aquinas says this, right? It's wrong. It's right at times to oppose both kings and bishops when they overstep their authority. If you're, for example, you're a layperson. If a bishop comes and says, give me your house, you owe me your property. Well, no, he's stepping over his authority. He doesn't have the right to do that. Bishop can't tell you to give the church your property. I own it now. I'm the bishop. You must worship my authority. No, that's overstepping the boundaries. Likewise, kings can't tell the church, I mandate that you now worship me as Christ, and it's no longer the Trinity. It's now the emperor is God, right? The emperor can't do that. He could try to do that, but he excommunicates himself in doing that. And it is the duty and right of every Christian to oppose them. Now, it doesn't mean that we oppose them by taking up arms. It means that we don't submit to those rulings in situations where, if the state comes and tries to, make us martyrs, we have to be martyrs. And the only time that it might be right to engage in self-defense would be in situations where that's appropriate to do. Okay. If somebody breaks into my house, let's say a religious fanatic breaks into my house and I will kill your wife and children for Allah. Okay. And he's going to go, RAPE or something, my wife and kids. I have a duty to defend my family. And in that case, there's a good chance that I could stop him from doing that, right? Because it's one-on-one or something. Now, if an entire brigade of, Saudi warriors show up at my house, America gets invaded by Saudis or something, I don't know, and they say, come outside and confess Allah or we chop your heads off, okay? Obviously, that's not a situation where it would be appropriate to try to engage in self-defense. It's not going to work. That would clearly be a providential call to martyrdom and not a providential call to self-defense. So you see how it's not always a one-size-fits-all black and white answer to these types of questions. And so likewise, the relationship between church and state might not always be black and white either. There's going to be canon law, there's going to be history, there's going to be historical precedent, there's going to be biblical theology that all plays into, hopefully, we have wise people, wise men, who can navigate these things. A wise man like Solomon is able to apply the right law and the right medicine at the right time. And so it's not a spurgatron thing where there's some ethereal, infinite list of the right and wrong things to do in every situation. That doesn't exist. And as you get older, you're going to learn that. You're going to figure that out. You'll stop being such a spurg. Now, we're going to look at a few more texts, by the way, that also point this out. And then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I forgot to turn the Q&A on. But they're not even... I wonder if my space is still there. Let's see. I don't know what... I've never known what happens if you forget your space or something. Is it still there? Let's see. All right, we'll try it. All right, so I don't know if anybody's going to show up or not, but Noah M, $5. Can a republic or a classical liberal system of governance such as America produce a virtuous society? I mean, it's hard to say. I think that it's plausible, perhaps, but we don't have a whole lot of examples of classical liberalism. I mean, we've only got Enlightenment upwards, and that's not a huge number of countries. So it kind of depends on what you think the goods of a society are. So you ask me, can it produce a virtuous society, and how is a monarchy better? Well, what we think the goods of a society are going to partly determine how we pick out successful and non-successful societies. If we think a society is only successful on the basis of monetary gain, financial security, trade, and so forth, then we'll think of sort of purely temporal things. But maybe that's not the ultimate healthy, good society. Maybe a society where vices are attempted to be punished is better than a society that holds up monetary gain as the most important thing, or luxury as the most important thing. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you have some argument why it's not. I'm just saying that how we judge a society as good or bad, or virtuous or non-virtuous, or more successful or less successful, is based on our presuppositions about what we think success is. Is it something purely temporal, purely monetary? Or are societies that also include religious and spiritual values, perhaps they're more successful? Again, there's no self-evident idea what a successful society is, you see. How is traditional monarchy any better? Well, the entire history of the world until the Enlightenment was typically some form of monarchy. So there's something inherent to that type of government, that type of rule, that humans gravitate to. Why? Why? Why is it really a vast conspiracy of devious people who want to enslave everybody? Or is there something natural to following virtuous, noble people? Maybe human beings follow, in a hierarchy, noble, virtuous human beings. And a lot of the Enlightenment is based on a lot of ungrounded, unfounded assumptions and presuppositions, such as the idea that everybody is in some sort of proto-equality situation. We're all kind of, sort of, potentially equal. No, we're not. Now, I don't mean by that all the Enlightenment philosophers believed in egalitarianism, but I'm saying that the beginnings of nascent egalitarianism pop up at this time. You get a more radical version of this egalitarianism with the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, right? This is essentially an anti-church, anti-monarchy phraseology. That's the meaning of liberty, equality, fraternity. And that's why they go against church and state. The rituals of a lot of the Freemasonic revolutionary lodges included tearing down throne and altar, church and state. The very thing that is the the double-headed Byzantine eagle. And by the way, this is a good book, Reflections of a Russian Statesman, on this very point. So, let's come over here. Next, I want to look at a few texts. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we're going to point out, again, circling back to the beginning of the talk, which has to do with Christ is king. What does that mean? Well, it's tied to the threefold office, as we said. And one of the earliest prophecies of the Messiah, it's not the only one. There's tons and tons of, I mean, if you include typology, there's prophecies of the Messiah everywhere, because the typology also becomes Christological messianic prophecy. But in Genesis 49, when we have the statements to the tribes, and here Judah. So the statements to Judah in Genesis 49, who's Judah here? Who's the one that comes from Judah? Jesus. Judah, Jesus. You are the one whom your brothers will praise. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children will bow before you. Judah is a lion's whelp, the lion of the tribe of Judah. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down like a lion. As a lion, and who will arouse him? The royal scepter, the scepter. You understand, a scepter is a royal term. will not depart from the house of Judah. Judah will be the royal lineage. So all of you goobers who think that the Bible is anti-monarchy aren't even aware that in Genesis 49 is predicting the royal house of David, the Davidic covenant. And if the Bible was anti-monarchy, if the law of the Torah were anti-monarchy, why does Moses write a book of laws for kings? No, this is biblical ignorance. People just know that, well, there's a verse that talks about Samuel says, you want a king. Well, I don't know why I started talking like Dr. Phil, but no, it's just total biblical ignorance that thinks that. I mean, have you read the Book of Kings? I mean, like, it's all about royal houses and interest. It's like Game of Thrones, dude. What are you talking about? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. That's talking about his descendants, in the house of Judah, until Shiloh comes. Shiloh is Jesus. It's the most famous, super famous messianic prophecy. And unto him will be the obedience of the nations. So it's Gentile nations will obey Shiloh, the Messiah, the descendant of David, the royal descendant of the royal house of David. And guess what happens when Jesus comes? No more house of David because Israel's destroyed. So the scepter departs from Judah. So the first messianic prophecy that identifies Shiloh as the one to whom the Gentiles look from the house of Judah, tribe of Judah, specifically identifies monarchy, a royal lineage. Now, there's tons and tons of passages in Proverbs, tons of passages in the Psalms that refer to kings, princes. I mean, has anybody read Proverbs? I mean, there's like tons of Proverbs that tell you to listen to the king, obey the king. The king speaks the words of God. So it's kingly. It talks about behaving and acting in a noble way, nobility. Did Protestants not read Proverbs? I mean, what you guys think that Proverbs is made up? Like, oh, it doesn't matter anymore. It's Old Testament. Oh, really? Well, then how come Peter says obey the king, citing the same principles in Proverbs? So Peter doesn't count now? Well, that's the ancient world. Yeah, but so what? All of this is from the ancient world. What are you talking about? Now, here's a huge mistake that Protestants make, and even some Roman Catholic and Orthodox make this mistake. And the priest, by the way, 7 years ago that I had a heated discussion with, he also made this mistake. Everybody thinks, I don't know why, I think it's just kind of a Protestant like default. Like it's an evangelical Protestant default. People think this verse is about the second coming. And perhaps some exegetes have thought it was. So, do we not have any mods? We got these filthy people just talking about nasty stuff in the chat all day long. We got a spamming Coomer in the chat. So, are there no mods here? Do my mods not come anymore? I don't know. So, let's see. We need to make Slowboy a mod. There we go. So, Slowboy is now a mod. Is in Geo mod? Anyway. So, in the vision of the Ancient of Days, famous prophecy of Daniel 7, I watched and thrones were put in place. The Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow. His hair was pure wool. His throne was fiery flame. Wheels of burning fire. Fire stream issued before him and came before him. Thousands ministered to him. Tens of thousands stood before him. The court was seated. Books were opened. I watched the pompous words of the beast. Its body was destroyed and given to the burning flame. So the rest of the beast had her dominion taken away. I watched in the visions, and behold, one like a son of man came with the clouds of heaven. to the Ancient of Days. Now, everybody reads this and they make the mistake of thinking that, oh, well, that's Jesus in the first part, Ancient of Days. And so this one who's ascending in the clouds like a son of man, that's, Jesus? Okay, so the Orthodox understanding of this passage is that the Ancient of Days is the Father. But wait a minute, we can't image the Father. Correct. So how is the Father imaged here? The same way that John, the book of Revelation, and Ezekiel 1 to 10, images the Son. I'm talking about Revelation like 1, 2, and 3, where John talks about him having white hair and all, seeing his glory and so forth. But this one coming on the clouds of heaven, this is the ascension. This is not the end of the world. It's the ascension. Because Jesus in Acts 1 ascends. And does nobody remember in the New Testament every time Psalm 110 is cited? When Psalm 110 is cited, evangelicals and Americanist Orthodox and confused people, how does Psalm 110 interpret? How is it interpreted in the New Testament citations? Sit at my right hand and I'll make your enemies your footstool. When was this sitting at the right hand? Is it the second coming? Where on earth do any of these people, and you people in the audience, where do you guys get the idea that this is the second coming? Patrick Ireland, if you have issues, you're welcome to come debate. You're saying stop fighting with the papacy. The papacy, you say I should fight Muslims. The papacy is in line with the Muslims. What are you talking about? Patrick, you want to come talk about this? Francis basically is a Muslim. He goes and prays in the mosque with the Muslims towards Mecca. What are you talking about? So it's the Father presented in the imagery of the Son, because you can't image the Father. And it's the incarnate one like a Son of Man ascending to him to receive what? What does he receive? I watched in the night visions, and one like the Son of Man came in the clouds of heaven to the Ancient of Days. They were brought near before him. And to him was given dominion, glory, kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and tongues should serve him. His dominion is everlasting. His kingdom is the one that will not be destroyed. That's the ascension. And I'm going to prove it to you. Revelation 5. Now the Lamb, when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders bowed down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. That's intercession of the saints, by the way, Protestants. The saints in heaven are doing a liturgy where they're offering the prayers of the saints as incense. They sang a new song. Worthy are you to take the scroll, to open its seals. You were slain. You redeemed us to God. Obviously talking about Jesus. Okay, Jesus being worshipped in heaven. From every tribe, tongue, and nation, you made us kings and priests to God. We will reign on the earth. Then I looked, and behold, the voice of many living creatures, elders, 10,000s of 10,000s. Up, same language as Daniel. Revelation 5 is consciously, clearly pulling from Daniel 7. Worthy is the Lamb to be worshipped. So Jesus, by the way, is worshipped by all creation, which refutes all the Arians and Jehovah's Witnesses, saying he's a creature, because you can't worship creatures. But he's given authority, power, and dominion. You see that? Now, similar situation, Revelation 19. So the whore Babylon city is destroyed. It falls. The elders say, hallelujah, praise God. There's a great sound of a voice of multitude. Hallelujah, God omnipotent reigns. They're wearing the fine linen, the bright robes, which are the righteous acts of the saints. Then there's the marriage supper of the Lamb. And then we see the rider on the horse, which is not Antichrist, by the way. Shows us that the rider on the white horse is the person of Christ, called faithful, true. In righteousness he judges and makes war. Eyes like a flame of fire. Many crowns on his head. He has a name that only he knows, clothed in a robe dipped in blood. His name is Word of God. Okay, clearly it's Jesus. Out of his mouth goes a sharp sword. With it he shall strike the nations. Okay? This is not like evangelicals think, like lasers shooting out of the mouth of Jesus. Okay? It's, if you read the Psalms, the preaching of the word of God is the rod that comes and the sword that comes out to rule the nations. So it's the preaching of the gospel. He treads the winepress of the fierceness of the wrath of Almighty God. And on his robe he has a name. King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So, yeah, Christ is King. Obviously. There was actually, I'm not kidding, there was an evangelical in the chat at the beginning saying, Jesus is not a king. We're Protestants. We believe Jesus is our Savior. Have you read the New Testament? I mean, do you think that's the only phrase used of Jesus? So people are saying, get the chat under control. Can you guys not ban him? Where's he at? Which one's the bad guy? Where's the troll? I don't see him. Did somebody ban him? Yeah, I don't see the guy, so I don't know how could he be in the chat if I don't see him? Oh, the live chat is slow. Huh. Well, I still don't see anything. I don't see any of the trolling stuff. Where is he at? This is weird. Yeah, I banned the dude earlier, so I don't see how he could be back, and I couldn't see him. Mr. Gay Conservative. That's so crazy. How is it that I can't see a profile in my chat? That's wild. Let me maybe if I refresh my control screen, I can see it. Let's see. We're going to open this up for questions. Okay, so thank you, Slow Boy. Appreciate that. Now, there's a lot more passages that we could go to, but tonight I think we had a good overview that, basically we're at the point where, to sum this up, clearly Christ does have a civil, social role. He is King of Kings. He is Lord of Lords. He is the King, even when he's not recognized as that. And it's not our job, first and foremost, to make him politically, recognized in a completely insane pagan state. It's not going to work. That's why you have to convert the majority of the masses of the people before you can try to have a permeation of Christianity into the states and into the laws. And America has already, because of its internal contradictions as an Enlightenment and kind of sort of pseudo-Christian nation, it's really sort of chosen to go in the direction of atheism and Enlightenment away from the Christian elements that it had. So America had both of these elements there. It's gone in that direction. So I don't think anytime soon, I mean, again, it's possible we get some sort of like massive Orthodox revival in the next 20 years and, something like that. But outside of that, I just don't see the point of thinking that you'll have a top-down conversion of the state. So I think we just need to focus on what we're doing. And if God grants that, and if we get a majority of people by some miracle, remember the Roman Empire took 3 centuries and millions of martyrs to get to that point. So anyway, that's my take on that. Let's see here. Friesen, what's up? So if you want to ask a question, pose an argument, challenge, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, sir. What's up?
Yes, sir. Hey, I had 2 questions, if that's all right.
Okay.
All right, so you said it's not the Orthodox's job to convert the state, rather just to convert individuals and families. And I just wanted to know what would be the problem with, or what would be immoral about a movement that sought to convert the state, or a movement that wanted to enforce Orthodox Christian morals on the country through like political means.
Because it doesn't work to enforce those things in a top-down way. It's not. You can't do that. Like you need the will. Orthodoxy believes in free will. We believe in the consent of the people. It's not it's not a tradcat thing where we march in as crusaders, and force these people to become Roman Catholic or something. It's just totally wrongheaded to the way that we think about it. And the church didn't do that in the first 3 centuries. Did the church go and try to convert Nero and Caligula first? No.
Okay. And my second question, I think earlier you kind of implied that society is some way run by like pagans, and that the JQ, as you put it, is something that's not really worth talking about. And I just want to get your take on that. Like,
I didn't say that though. So
who do you think runs these institutions?
I said American society is pagan. I didn't say any of that. I said American society is pagan. I said that. I didn't say it was run by pagans. I said the people in the society are pagan. They're post-Christian. And so you're not going to convert, the House and the Senate to Christianity and then make everybody be moral and Christian. That's what I said. And I had said that I cover the more controversial topics not on YouTube. So I said all of that, but maybe you didn't hear that. So it's open forum. If you guys want to ask a question, come on. You can request to speak. I'll give you the mic. It's just interesting to me that nobody actually cares. So in this whole discussion of, quote, Christ is king, no one actually cares about the theology and the history of it. It's just a Twitter thing to talk about the Amish question. So let's see, Demetrios. Yeah, Patrick, that's not true. Ubi Petrus has a whole video on Orthodoxy's history of mission works. Just get rid of that guy. Because Patrick, if you're not going to come and discuss in the voice chat, then just why are you just spamming all this stuff? It's a waste of time.
Hello?
What's up? Yes, sir.
Hey, hypothetical question. I know you don't get many of these, but we keep on going back and forth on these papal decrees and documents. What would it take for you to be like, let's say the Pope tomorrow got up and had a decree and said, listen, I'm advocating, I'm a first among equals, but I'm not infallible. This is the filioque, the way it should be, forevermore. Original sin and its nuances of the Orthodox Church is the correct way of looking at original thing. Like, what would it take for you to be like, okay, let's go union. It's time for union. Like, what would it take? Just hypothetical question. Just curiosity on my part and what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't believe that there's like a future church to be discovered. We think that the church always has its fundamental components of being one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. So the only terms of union are the Roman See rejoins the Orthodox Church on Orthodox terms. That's it.
Okay. That's just a hypothetical.
No, it's a great question. Yeah, I don't mind answering that. By the way, so people in the chat that were asking, saying that the Orthodox don't do mission work. This is not true. Ubi Petrus has, I think, a 3-part series right here, a documentary that we made. First part was the history of the Assyrian mission. Second part is a history of Orthodox missions from 10,000 from 1,000 to 1,600. So you can watch these sort of historical documentaries there. Thank you for those questions there, Jim. Next up is Sapphire. What's up, man? So people that are asking, how can I call in? It's in the show description. It's Twitter. It's calling through X. Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, I have a few short questions, if you don't mind.
Hold on, I forgot to put the link to the Twitter in here. I thought I put it in the show description. I apologize, I didn't put it in there. So let me put it in here right now for you guys.
Should I ask a question? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead. No, wait, I can't put it in there because I'm not logged
This one's a
in.
little creepy, but Are demons a thing we should be concerned about in our day-to-day life?
Yeah, but we don't have to like get superstitious about it. I mean, typically a good spiritual father will kind of, coach you and guide you into not going, losing your sanity or your peace, kind of worrying about demons too much.
I understand. Like, what are some, I know you have videos on this topic, but what would you recommend if someone's concerned about the fact demons exist? Something.
I'm thinking. Well, a lot of people in the Orthodox Church even still like the Spiritual Combat book by is it Luigi Scopoli. I think that's a book that a lot of Orthodox people like. There's also the book. It's like if you really want like a big long thing, there's a 3-part series called Treatment of Spiritual Illnesses. Is a good book on that. Derek, what's up, Derek? You gotta unmute, Derek.
Hey, I'm sorry. I know you just brought me up. I just didn't. I didn't hear anything once you brought me up, so I didn't see an introduction. So I appreciate you bringing me up.
Sure.
And Jay, trying to understand, are you a Catholic? I want to know, because in order for me to answer the question, is Christ king? It requires me to understand who's asking that question.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm Orthodox, so Orthodox Christian.
All right. Well, so you follow a Catholicism, correct? To a degree.
I mean, we call ourselves the Orthodox Catholic Church, correct? So, but we're not the Roman Catholic Papal Church, so we don't follow the Pope, and we don't have a lot of the sort of Roman Catholic trappings. But probably if you're a Protestant, you would think we're, quote, Catholic, yeah.
Okay, so here's the reason why I'm saying this is because first of all, the last thing I want to do is have confrontations or arguments or anything about any religion, right? Because here's the one thing I know about God is He doesn't need my defense, right? It's not mere little me. He doesn't need me defending Him, and neither does Christ. So I follow very strictly Christ's words specifically, not Peter's, not Paul's, no one, right? No one else's words.
But doesn't Jesus say to the apostles, "He who hears you hears me"?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So he who hears me hears me, right? So
No. He who hears you, apostles, also hears me.
Exactly. Father, all of you is in me. All of you, Father, all of you is in me, and all
that's
of
the opposite. That's the opposite of what you just said. Right.
No, but what I'm saying is that I'm repeating His high priestly prayer here. Father, all of me is in you, and all of you is in me.
I'm not talking about high priestly prayer. So
and I want them to have exactly what I have. Did He not say that?
The very first thing that you said is wrong, and I'm showing you how it's wrong by the phrase "He who hears you."
It's wrong, but it's scripture, right?
All right, so he's not even going to listen, so no point. Cyril, Kyrillian, what's up? You got to unmute. So people say, "Oh, you're so mean." No, I multiple times explained what I said. The guy didn't care, blew past it, wasn't going to listen. So if people don't react and interact with the point that I made after 3 times, I'm not being mean by moving on. So I'm so tired of this stuff. Piety Pete, $5. If I publicly signal all about my prayer life, how many piety points do I get? Actually, I think Elon is putting into place an algorithm where it will boost you the more you post your prayers on Twitter. So a lot. So there's actually algorithmic tracking now for your piety points. Unknown, $15. If Israel builds a third temple and sacrifices a red heifer and the Messiah does not come or rise. I don't know what you mean by Messiah rise. I think you just mean their Messiah come. Okay. Can the world evict European descendants from Palestine? Will they accept Christ then? Actually, I do think there is I think that the patristic teaching, in line with Romans 11, is that there is a future conversion of the Jews. And how that will happen or when that will happen, I don't know. But I do think the Bible and the Church Fathers teach that. Cyril says it. Athanasius talks about it. John Damascus talks about the conversion of the Jews. I think Chrysostom too. Palantir 294. From the Orthodox perspective, is the reason that sexuality contains a taboo scandal due to the fall of man. There is a connection between the fall and how we reproduce, but I don't think that there's anything taboo about sexuality or human sexuality itself. So that's an important distinction. Is it connected to the shame of nakedness? Probably in some way. I don't know exactly what. I mean, there's the Church Fathers dispute this and question and sort of speculate on this. How would the mode of production happen in Eden? We're not told. Some of the Church Fathers speculate about that. How will it happen in the eschaton? I tend to think that there isn't reproduction in the eschaton. So, anyway. What's up, man? Carillion? Thank you for the super chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
Quick question. I was listening to another stream. Some guy brought up a Christological question, which is actually rather interesting. I wanted to get your take on it.
Okay.
So if we believe that Christ's humanity was from Mary, right? This person was asking, what about the Y chromosome? Where does that come from?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I thought it seems like a very simple question, but it's actually a little bit tougher. I don't think that someone could give a cogent answer very quickly on that.
Presumably, I mean, I guess the Father just created him as male in the same way that he directly creates Adam as a male without a prior male father. I mean, I'd be inclined to think that because of the fact that by the time of John Damascus, there's a dispute about the nature of Christ's humanity. It's I think his name is Julian of Halicarnassus, and there's this idea that the humanity of Christ is like super divine and never human. Anyway, the response to some of that is that Christ is the new Adam, and so he actually has the same humanity that Adam has in the garden. So it's pre-fallen. It's not a fallen humanity, and that would suggest that it's essentially the same type of humanity that Adam had, which was a direct male creation. Would be my guess.
I think that's a really good answer. Yeah. If you have another moment, just one more quick question.
Sure.
Was engaging with a few guys from the LCMS a few days ago, and it's interesting. I feel like especially Lutheranism has been losing some of their members, particularly towards Orthodoxy. I think there's some parallels that can be drawn, but what they keep pointing to is that they're the early church, that Orthodoxy does not have a closed canon. We never had any binding canon, and that they are the only denomination that also does not have a closed canon. And when you bring up, Hippo, Carthage, they'll say, none of those were binding because those weren't in the ecumenical councils, right?
Well, why are we supposed to accept a Lutheran about ecumenical councils?
Oh, no, I agree with you completely. It's very much picking and choosing, but
right.
It's like you're trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
They bring the argument, and you're like, well, wait, hold on. No, we do have local synods and councils that are universally accepted. That's how the church worked when we were one, right? You can't just say, okay, I pick 1 to 7. We're not really so much sure on 8. Where do we go from here? It's like, well, we start with different presuppositions.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably their best argument if they want to stem the bleeding.
Well, I would contend that, a Lutheran, at least a classical Lutheran, has to say something like, sola fide is the gospel, right? So where is there sola fide in the first 3-4 centuries of the church? If you're going to argue that the first 3-4 centuries of the church is like a proto-Lutheran church, okay, where is sola fide? And where's sola scriptura? But, didn't James White already concede to Trent Horn that they weren't operating on sola scriptura in the first 3 centuries?
Yeah, I even looked into it from their end, and they start talking about things that, within Orthodoxy is relatively unknown, condign merits, and the real discussion that was between Augustine and Pelagius.
Okay, but none of that is sola fide, though. That's not justification by faith alone.
Well, they start with that, and then they grow it out to, well, of course, congruent merit is a nothing, right? It all has to be condign, and then that means it is really grace alone, because you can't perform a condign merit.
Yeah, but that's not even it's not even a question of merit. Justification by faith alone is a nominalist idea that you can, through notional faith or whatever kind of faith you want to call it, be put into a legal dispositional status in front of God. Where is that in the first 4 centuries?
Nowhere. I don't even know if Luther could give a good answer, even when you read his disputations with Johann Eck on the same.
Yeah, I've read that debate. Yeah.
Yeah, not exactly a great answer, but again, you're gonna.
Well, that's my point though. Is like, so wait a minute. If sola fide, in that imputational, dispositional, legal sense, is not there, and if sola scriptura is not there in the first 4 centuries, how is this first 4 centuries church in any way, quote, proto-Lutheran?
It's not.
But I thought you said that was where their argument was.
Their argument is that. That hasn't changed. What they try to, I think,
I'm just saying that's what my question would be to somebody who says that. If somebody says, hey, the first 4 centuries church was basically Lutheran, I'd be like, okay, where's sola fide and where's sola scriptura?
I would say if you very selectively take certain quotes from the fathers, I think you can sort of make it happen, especially if you really focus on Augustine and Ambrose. But from an academic standpoint, they are proto-Augustine. They're...
Okay, but again, Augustinianism, I understand that. I understand that you can believe in baptism and regeneration and grace alone and be Augustinian. None of that is justification by faith alone. And that's the Lutheran linchpin of the church.
Right. Or as he says, that's what the church stands or falls
Correct.
on. Yeah.
Great question.
All
yeah,
right.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Whoa, suddenly we got 11 people? Where do all these people come from wanting to get into it now? We had like 2 people for like an hour, and now there's 11 people. Dan, what's up, Dan? We'll try to get through these quick.
Hey Jay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I was having a conversation with so I'm a catechumen right now, but I was having a conversation with a longtime buddy. He's a Protestant, and I guess I'm looking for resources, but I'll just kind of tell you where this was going. But so obviously his view is, it doesn't really matter which church you're a part of, as long as you believe in, Christ, saving work, etc. Just, the general mere Christianity type of stuff.
Well, what does that mean to what Christ? Like the Mormon Christ, the Jehovah's Witness Christ? So if he's not a Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, then he's
denominational, just kind of typical Protestant.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, you start asking those kinds of questions, and he's going to start saying, well, you have to be believe in the deity of Christ and Trinity. And it's like, well, wait a minute. How do we know those are the two? Is that all it is? Like, can I be an Apollinarian? And so you see that it doesn't work to just say, like, lowest common. So I would start questioning the lowest common denominator stuff. And yeah.
Yeah. So my question, or the question that I came out of that with, because obviously now that I'm joining the Orthodox Church because I believe it is, the one true church and all that. And so you have Christ the head and you have the body of Christ, right? And so would the Orthodox Church say that the Orthodox Church is the body of Christ?
Yes.
Right? Like, okay, so, And then if I reject the body, is that, is that the same as rejecting the head? Like, are those two things equal?
Yeah. I mean, how can you be in the body if you don't want the body or the head?
I figured that was the answer, but so then my question for
we say it every day in the creed, right? Or every, basically, one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church, yeah.
Do you have any resources for, like, or any fathers that talk about the relationship between, or like the mystical union of the body and the head, or is there anyone that sticks out to you?
Well, I mean, if you were to read Pomazanski's book on Orthodox dogmatics, like when he talks about Christology and the doctrine of the church, you'll notice they go together. So you can't have ecclesiology separated from your Christology, because the way that we do Christology defines and basically gives us our sacramentology and our ecclesiology. They go together. They're all hinging on Christology. So I would try to get everybody into understanding correct Christology first, and that will kind of logically lead to correct sacramentology and ecclesiology.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. So we got a whole bunch of people. I would ask that, I mean, it's not a huge deal, but tonight's topic is church state. So, and I'm not mad at the guy that asked the question about before, it's fine, I don't care. But if you have a church state question, because that's the topic tonight, that's really what I'd like to focus on. Genghis Khan, what's up? You gotta unmute, man.
You.
Hey.
So, do you think Grace is king?
Yeah, sure. That's what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah, he's the king.
Okay.
Just like me.
Okay. What does that mean?
Genghis Khan is one of the king.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's super funny, dude. I'm gonna hold myself back from laughing. That was so funny. Etra, what's up, dude? ETRA, what's up? You gotta unmute, man.
What's up, man?
Hey.
How you doing?
Good.
Big fan. And yeah, I'm thinking about like converting, but like to Orthodoxy. But one thing that's like kind of confusing to me is like, are people outside of the church, Orthodox church, like can they still be saved?
We don't make determinations on their eternal status. All we're told is that we have to tell them to become Orthodox. So if God has a way that he can join people to the mystical body of the Orthodox Church, God can do that. He did that with Latif on the cross. So I can't judge that, but what I am told to do is to tell people to become Orthodox.
Okay, so like people outside of the Orthodox Church, like, are they going to hell, or like how does that work?
I mean, I'm not trying to be mean. It's like exactly what I just answered. So, what's up, Drew? You gotta unmute, man.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Yeah, I was just this is somewhat not really as related per se, but you kind of got me into learning more about like the, I guess you say, the flaws of natural theology in a way. And I was reading through John chapter 1 verse 3, and I noticed that because when John says all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. Isn't that kind of like a sort of a tag, like a transcendental claim, so to speak, at least, where he's saying like God essentially is like the ground of like all reality? I
think so. I mean, I've made that. I've argued that if you follow through the logic of John 1, then creation itself is Christocentric. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's something that I was kind of like noticing in a way at least, and like that got me asking questions about like the previous thing that you were having with like Trent Horn as well when he was saying like where he said that the faithful Jews who lived before Christ's incarnation worship God at least, and it's like that like isn't that kind of like, because I asked this question as well, like isn't that kind of like have like some kind of like perennialist conclusions in a way?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I argued that if you were consistent with your natural theology, there's no reason why it couldn't lead you to perennialism. In fact, if you read the Garrity paper that we covered in the last Trent Horn response stream, the Garrity paper argues at the beginning, citing John Hick. John Hick, if I recall, I'm going from memory. John Hick was responding to Richard Swinburne, and he says there's no reason to think that the natural theology basic attributes would necessarily lead you to Christianity. Why couldn't it lead you to perennialism if you're arguing that it's a lowest common denominator list of attributes anyway?
Yeah, plus like Jesus himself, even like, because what was the Jews themselves even like referred to like saying that they believe in one God being the Father, and then Christ himself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So like, isn't that kind of like refuting Trent's entire position? Basically?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you read this paper right here, the best response to all the Trent sort of natural theology stuff is this paper right here by Dr. Garrity called Theistic Fallacies. I highly recommend it. We've covered it for many years. To people in the chat, if you want to, here's the link to read that. And it kind of goes through the many fallacies involved in natural theology. It's not just one, but there's common ones that pop up like quantifier shift fallacy. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Cool, man. Thanks. That's all.
Yeah, good questions. Paul Ruddell, what's up, man? You gotta unmute, bro.
Hey, sorry about that, Jay.
It's all good.
I must have been just a little bit behind there.
It's okay.
Audio. Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting this, and I really like your...
Thank you. We're almost at 1,000. I'm like right below hitting 1,000 live. So go ahead.
My question is...
You're cutting out, dog. Go ahead.
Okay, so my question is... Okay.
Go
My
ahead.
question is, could we say that that we could base our well, first of all, Christ is King, and that as Orthodox, now that we acknowledge that, and that He's King and Lord over all creation, that that having a godly monarchy would simply be an acknowledgement of this reality, that Christ is indeed King, and that anything less than that would be kind of an unfortunate aberration from what should or ought to be.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because the idea of the monarch in like Byzantium is that he's an icon of God. He's an icon of the rulership. They often used the imagery of David for the Byzantine emperor, so he's kind of a Davidic type of king. He doesn't have the functions of a priest, but he has the functions of God in terms of a dispenser of justice. So I think so. I mean, to me, that's obvious. Like, I mean, I'm not saying that to you. I'm not saying that to you to be a smartass. I'm saying like it's obvious in the history of Orthodox theology and church history and the councils that's how obviously how they viewed it. So.
Right. Now following that, couldn't we also say that, I mean, isn't this kind of like this, to acknowledge that reality is obviously it's an important part of our faith, and it's we could say like a salvific belief, if you will, if, I don't know, maybe beliefs aren't salvific in that way, but if you, but it is, couldn't we say that, that this could save us or prevent us from the defilement or the mire of modern day politics. To realize that, you know, Christ is the ultimate authority in the whole universe, and that everything that we might involve is going to be, you know, fairly problematic. And so, to what extent can we or should we even involve ourselves in that? And also, as a component of that question, can we bring some godly influence to bear in the existing government? And this is a bit of a follow-up question to a previous speaker. But I mean, at what point are we able to cross the Rubicon to bring a godly influence to bear in government, if you're saying that it's not our place to do so, or we don't want to do that by force, which is understandable because we believe in free will?
No, I said at the beginning, maybe you didn't hear the very beginning, but I said that, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with Christians taking action to do things in politics. It's not what I'm interested in, but I don't think there's anything wrong with people doing it. I support people doing it. If that's their providential situation where that's what, you know, they're led to do, they should, absolutely. And I just said that they would probably be more effective on a local level than like national politics. So you know, I'm all for, you know, I mean, we should be having people in all of the areas. Like, we should be filling the arts, we should be filling media, we should be filling, you know, because if you're not entering monastic life, then it doesn't make sense to pretend you're a monk. So a lot of people in the Orthodox world want to pretend like they're, you know, pseudo monks, or they're, you know, they're going to have a family and they're going to be, you know, working in a factory, but they think they're monks. And it's like, you're not a monk. You're not called to that life. And if you're going to be married, you're going to be in the world, and you're going to have a job. You're going to have to work with finances. You're going to have to understand how the world works. And so a lot of people, I'm not talking about you, but a lot of people use pseudo monasticism and pretending to be a monk as a cloak for their own laziness and their own sloth. And I think that's silly. So you got to grow out of that, be more mature than that. But not everybody has a call to want to be in public life, or to want to be in politics. Michael Sisko really has that desire. He wants to do it. I'm not his spiritual father, but, you know, I told Michael, like, yeah, that's great if you want to, if that's your calling, if you feel that desire, you know, it'd be like, hey, I'm a filmmaker. I want to be in making films and be Orthodox. Oh, I can't do that. That's the world. That's worldly. No, that's crazy. I mean, that's the very mindset that I think is the Protestant idea. Like, the monk is the person who's decided to renounce the world. Okay, and for lay people to pretend like they're monks and act like, well, I'm too pious for everything, and I will never involve myself in anything. It's like, to me, a lot of that's just being slimy, in my opinion. So no, I mean, if we don't do this, then we're going to be ruled over by degenerates. So, do you want to be ruled by degenerates, or do you want to act, you know, in society in a virtuous way? It's like, you know. Anyway, that's my take, though. Appreciate those questions, Paul. You're kind of cutting out, not trying to be rude, but so let's move through these quick. I want to try to get to the last few people here on this topic, but I do have to remind you guys that we do have a show sponsor. We got some more super chats I need to get to, but look, guys, I got to tell you this. You have to hear this.
I'm going to put you on something crazy real quick. Most of these Zoomer gym bros
are
consuming macro-guzzling synthetic dyes and synthetic sweeteners on the daily. They don't even know it. Goofy AF. There's nothing great about that. Do not listen any further unless you are an alpha or sigma male. This is important and there could be consequences. There's a new certified sigma male pre-workout powder for sigmas only. It is guaranteed to empower you to dominate your co-workers, fire your boss, aggressively gamble, or invade a small village. Chad Mode stands out from the crowd by excluding artificial flavors, preservatives, sweeteners, and dyes. We've even avoided so-called natural flavors, which are actually not natural at all, ensuring a clean and effective formula. Experience the pure goodness of Chad mode colored with organic blue spirulina extract, organic lemon, cherry, and organic maple crystals. Forget synthetic caffeine made in a sketchy Chinese lab. Embrace the natural power of organic green coffee bean extract, which will get your mind going and pump you up to the max. Chad mode is made in America with all clean ingredients, the first clean pre-workout of its kind. Why are these people adding synthetic sweeteners to every single pre-workout when there are many studied downsides to consuming nasty fake sucralose? Each dose of Chad mode contains the kick of a cup and a half of coffee, delivering a surge of energy alongside essential vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and herbal extracts. Chad mode will allow you to fire your boss and dominate anyone who opposes you. Chad mode will make you more dominant in your daily life, so proceed with caution.
Asked, do you consider the Seventh-day Adventist Church to be a cult?
They're kind of on a thin line there. I don't know if I go so far as to say a cult, but like kind of on the edge of it. So I'd say Seventh-day Adventists are almost cult, pretty close. They definitely spawned cults like Jehovah's Witnesses. So.
All right, one more question. I was talking to a family member, and they're Seventh-day Adventists, and we were talking about like how does the Bible prove that it's the Word of God? And I was referring to you would have to extrapolate that it's, or you have to use something other than the Bible to prove that. And they kept saying that the Bible doesn't need to because it's the Word of God. Like it's like a circular argument, and they said it's the only thing that you could use a circular argument for that. Is there some way I could get around this like logic. I don't know how to fight. Like they just keep screaming that at me. What to say to that?
I mean, if maybe they're confused about the idea that the transcendental argument is a type of circularity, but the point of that is to say that everybody's argument at a super fundamental level is going to ultimately be circular, because there's going to be a certain point where you can't appeal to something else to justify that thing. And so that's what we mean by grounding it out, or it becoming, quote, circular. It's not saying that you can now make circular arguments at any point, because in terms of first order argumentation, sort of normal argumentation, circular arguments are a fallacy. But that's a different type. It's a category error to think that all things are proven or known in the same way. But I mean, there's a lot of different ways that conversation might go. I mean, I think the best evidence for inspiration is the fulfilled messianic prophecies. So that's an evidence, and evidences can function as types of arguments or proofs. I think the ultimate strongest proof is a transcendental argument for God, but that doesn't mean that we're like opposed to evidences. No, you have to use evidences for sure. So, for the people in the chat that missed the super chat question, the first question was about Mary and Orthodox view versus Roman Catholic view of Mary, and I said we don't believe in Immaculate Conception. I'm sending this from 3,000 feet in the air using Delta Wi-Fi. Well, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate that. Seraphim Leo 324 asked me, is Michael Saylor correct about Bitcoin being decentralized? I said yes. He said, is this enough to prevent the elites from a global control agenda? I said, I don't think Bitcoin is alone enough to save us from global elites trying to bring about NWO. But it's definitely a big key thing for our side. But, you know, life is much more than just economics, right? But that's a big economic plus for us. But I mean, you know, life has education, life has media, entertainment, leisure. I mean, so life isn't just economics. I don't think that Bitcoin alone is enough to beat the New World Order, because the New World Order is not purely and solely economic. It's also spiritual. It's also mental. It's a lot of different things. It's a full spectrum dominance approach. How does Bitcoin fit into the biblical end times? I have no idea. And then I said BMX 1966, $10. Thank you so much. So those were the super chats that when I came back, it was still muted. So Bat Salo, what's up? Let's move through these if we can to get everybody on. You got to unmute.
Oh, so sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, I had a question about the Trinity and God's eternity. And I had a debate with a Muslim the other day, and he told me it doesn't make sense that in the Orthodox view that only the Father has a deity. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, I would say the best answer to this question, you should watch the Bo Branson, Jake, the Muslim metaphysician debate, because they have an entire debate about this question. And the point is that because one member of a class possesses an attribute, it doesn't follow that every member of the class must possess that attribute to be in that class. So divinity is not reduced to aseity, is the point.
Okay, and also he made another point about the illegitimate canonization of saints in the Orthodox Church. Like, would you accept, for example, the canonization of, like, say, the Russian Tsars, or like Nicholas II? Or what's our view on that meant to be?
I mean, as far as I know, I would. Like, why would that be illegitimate? What do you mean? I haven't heard of the illegitimacy argument. I don't know about, what is this?
Well, he was mostly speaking from an ethical perspective that it doesn't really make sense to canonize someone like Nicholas II, but I don't really know how I was meant to respond to that.
Well, my understanding is that typically the Orthodox view of saints and canonization is not, did they live their entire life with the highest level of moral purity? It's what types of actions did they do that might have led to a supremely virtuous action such as martyrdom. So the thief on the cross did not live a life of the highest virtue, but he did repent towards the end of his life, and so he's a saint. So I think Samson was a saint. It's odd to me when I hear Orthodox priests, famous ones, argue that Samson isn't a saint. I mean, he's a type of Christ. He obviously was repenting at the end of his life. He's an image of Christ, pulling down the gates of Hades with the temple of the Philistines. So, I don't know. To me, it's odd that anybody would question whether Samson is a saint. But, yeah, good questions. I'm not really familiar with why people wouldn't think that the Tsar is a saint. To me, that suggests like Western people who don't like Russia would think the Tsar's not. That's probably what's going on. I'm guessing. I don't know though. Joe Obama. What's up, Joe Obama? Thank you, Joe. We got Joe Obama. My wife, Michael.
Hey, what's up, Jay? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right, long-time fan here. Thanks for letting me talk.
Sure.
This is kind of an elaboration on what I think Paul was asking earlier. But unless I misheard what you were saying earlier, it made it sound like you kind of opposed some top-down evangelization of America. Whether that's because it's not practical or because we have free will to turn to Christ in a sort of bottom-up way. But basically,
I just don't think it's realistic. So, I mean, is it possible that I don't know, let's say Trump gets elected and then Trump gets interested in orthodoxy and then Trump tries to make America Orthodox? I mean, I don't think that would work, but is it possible? It's possible. It just doesn't seem likely.
Right, yeah. So that's a good point. I guess my question is basically clearly we want to live in a Christian society and we want our laws to reflect Christian ethics, even if the majority of the people in the country oppose what, the Bible would say, think abortion or something like that. So my question is how far can we, trust in a bottom-up approach when it doesn't seem to be working very well?
Well, I mean, if there is no other options, what are you supposed to do? I mean, when the appropriate time calls for it, then we have to accept martyrdom. I mean, that's the Christian approach. So, Benjamin, what's up? I'm not trying to be rude. I'm trying to get through all the people. There's 8 people in a row here, so I'm trying to move through them. What's up, Benjamin? All right, Benjamin can't connect, so we'll move on to the next person. Are you there?
Hi.
Yeah, what's up, dude?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Kind of nervous.
It's okay. So I try. What's your question? I try to move through some people. So what's your
Yeah,
question?
I wrote down 3 questions. So first one is I remember watching through your critiques of Jordan Peterson with classical liberalism, and at that time you were talking about Christopher Langan.
Oh yeah, yeah. The high IQ guy, the Roadhouse bartender, high IQ bro.
Yeah.
What about it?
So would that ever happen, or?
He's very precise about how an interview has to be conducted, and he wants a lot of questions, and I just basically have free-flowing conversations, so I never really followed back up with I just like to have improv conversations, so that's typically pretty much why they didn't have it. Go ahead.
And if you and I guess the second one would be do you have any books on rhetoric, or it's because when people when I'm if I was going to talk to somebody and they insulted me, it kind of short circuits my thinking. I can't really give a response to that.
I think it's kind of supposed to do that, right? I mean, that's kind of the point of an insult, is to get you all messed up and confused and not paying attention to the issue at hand. So that's probably what it's meant to do.
Yeah, but just okay. I guess if that's the solution. Third thing.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What's the third one? I don't know a good book on rhetoric, if you're asking. You could ask. I bet Richard Grove does. I would ask send a tweet to Richard Grove and ask him. He knows a lot of those older classical pedagogy texts. Are you there?
And talking like that.
Can't hear you.
And also the insults.
Yeah, you're cutting out, man. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah, just ask Richard Grove what's a good textbook on rhetoric is. I bet he knows one. Maximos, what's up, man? Let's get to the last few people here.
Hello.
What's up?
Oh, yeah. So, my question. I'm an old calendarist, and so my perspective is that we basically share the faith, confession of faith. We basically share the idea that ecumenism is an ecclesiological heresy, and we share basically the idea that you should not be communing with heretics once a certain line is crossed. And I think we just kind of differ on where that line is.
Can't hear you, man.
What I've just,
You're cutting out, bro.
Oh.
So I'm sorry that I heard you say that you're old calendarists and where's the line? I don't know the line, but I don't think that it makes sense to think that, well, the line is everybody's immediately blacked out and every laity should immediately decide who's blacked out. It just leads to infinite schisms, is my view. JT Orthodox. So, Super Chat Rebel $3. Can you discuss Yahweh's origins? Well, I believe in the Bible. So, what do you mean his origins? And the shift from polytheism to monotheism in Israel. Yeah, I don't believe that. So, if you watch my debate with Daniel Hakikachu, the Muslim, or if you want to go watch this video right here about the Jewish Trinity, I do not believe that there was a shift from polytheism to Unitarianism in Israel. So, thank you for that super chat, though. I've only found Protestants and Michael Heiser. I mean, I believe in the divine council, but I mean, the Orthodox view is that the Trinity is an Old Testament teaching, and that was the whole linchpin of my argument against Daniel Hakikachu. And if you watch Sam Shamoon, his whole argument against Muslims is the same position. What's up, JT?
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi. I was recently down in London, and there was a sort of famous apologist speaking, and he usually goes for sort of it's sort of like a proto-ecumenist sort of view, because it's sort of based on the fact of we know where the church is, but we don't know where it is.
Is it Bob?
Yeah, Bob the Builder. Yeah.
Yeah, I know Bob. I mean, we've done a couple podcasts, but we had a debate about ecumenism as well.
And I've sort of been confused, because it sort of seems like where he draws lines for certain things, he doesn't draw them for others.
Correct.
So there was,
and that was actually the very argument I made to Bob.
Yeah, and I feel like it's maybe situational, because his sort of area is sort of in Speaker's Corner, just sort of debating sort of Darwagandist sort of Islamic sort of people just coming at him all the time.
Right.
And there's loads of Christians in that park. So do you think that there's times where maybe we have to be less sectarian and sort of unite, even in the face of maybe some secondary doctrines being sort of...
Well, I don't think we have to concede that those doctrines are secondary. I mean, but if you look at the track record that we have here, I mean, I do podcasts and talks with Sam Shamoon. We've done it with Bob. I've done it with Tim Gordon. And there's always the possibility of common cause. We just did a podcast not too long ago with Inspiring Philosophy. So there's always the possibility of making common cause without admitting to ecclesiology being secondary. So, we can always know our differences and at the same time say, well, here we agree against, the Muslims. So I think both can be true.
Yeah, and if there's not an Orthodox church nearby, what is sort of the best thing to do? Because I've sort of lived in a place where there's only Anglican churches, Church of England, sort of churches, and there's some maybe Catholics, right? And it's sort of a confusing mess, because it's sort of if it is the one true church, it's sort of what can we do if we cannot sort of reach that body?
You just do the best that you can. I mean, I had a situation where I was in that same situation for many years. So I would just get a prayer book, get an Orthodox study Bible, and do the best that you can. I mean, God only expects you to do what you can. So, all right, I'm about we got another 8 people, so I apologize. We'll have another. We do open forums all the time, so just be ready if you want to hop on another time. But I'm getting pretty tired, so I don't know if I can keep going anymore. Bugman, $10. What do you think about Brother K? I think that in the Orthodox world, you have to be under authority. So you can't be a non-canonical just doing whatever you want in the Orthodox world. So, I've never promoted people that are that way. And the reason for that has nothing to do with, oh, you're secretly scared, you don't like that person. Well, it's none of that. It's just that, in the Orthodox system and approach, like, no man takes that authority onto himself. You have to have approval to teach. Even if what you said is right or wrong, or let's say that test case scenario, everything you're saying is correct, like, that still doesn't mean that you have the authority, the blessing to teach. Because, for example, and I'm not saying this about any specific person, I'm giving an example. If you go look at patristic faith and the way that Father Deacon Ananias approaches these things, he doesn't promote or allow anybody to be promoted or to teach or whatever, link anybody who doesn't have a specific episcopal blessing. And, maybe sometimes there's situations where people's status is foggy, and I don't know. I can't judge that person individually, but there's a reason why, as Paul says, no man takes it upon himself to teach. And I don't want to teach. Like, I always feel like how can I not teach? And then it's always kind of get drawn back in, like Michael Corleone says in Godfather 2 or 3 or whatever. Anyway, so you got to be under authority, and people might, if people wonder why, well, how come they don't have the blessing? Because they're saying a lot of true things. Well, there might be something that you don't know about this person that makes them not fit to teach. So I'm not saying that specifically about any person. I'm just saying that the wisdom of the church's approach to approved and non-approved teachers is that just because somebody says something right, there's a lot of Protestants that say a lot of right things, but that doesn't mean they have the blessing to teach. Anyway, thank you guys. Great chat tonight. Hopefully we brought a little bit of insight to the history and the question of the role and relationship between church and state, and we're a little bit more enlightened about what the issues are, and we don't get caught up just in like internet stuff.